All right, I am now joined by Ryan Lake. I should do this like when a magician picks somebody out in the audience. Sir, we've never met before. Is that correct?
Yeah. Great to meet you for the first time ever, Ben.
Yeah. No, Ryan has been a good friend since 2006. We went to graduate school together, where we're very relevantly to one of the big topics this evening. He wrote a award-winning dissertation about free will and determinism, and so he also does a webcomic called Chaos Pet, which has recently moved over to the Daily News, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
you can check out his work there. It's a philosophy-themed webcomic. And if you bought the book, Give Them an Argument, you have seen his work, because he drew the cover illustration of David Hume hushing Ben Shapiro, since Shapiro is saying facts don't care about your feelings. And of course, David Hume has a point there to make about the fact-value distinction.
I suspect that's going to be relevant in our discussion tonight.
I suspect it's going to be extremely relevant. Ryan's Twitter handle, actually, I should have put that in his. Feel free if you want to revise the name tag thing in front of you to put that in if you can figure it out. But
okay,
yeah. So his Twitter handle is @ChaosPet. But in any case. He is here now for the 6th installment in our weekly Sunday series of where we watch and break down old debates. So in the previous ones, we did William F. Buckley versus James Baldwin on civil rights, and the two that Christopher Hitchens did with his brother Peter, one about Iraq and one about God, and the Chomsky-Foucault debate from the 70s. And last week, William F. Buckley versus DSA founder Michael Harrington. I should say, by the way, on a quick technical note, so these are eventually, an audio version will eventually go up onto the podcast feed of these. We haven't started doing that yet, but when it does, make sure that our long-suffering producer Forrest equalizes out the audio levels, because I know on the Buckley Harrington thing, some people said like they kind of had their YouTube video on in the background, they're just trying to listen to it, and because it's it's an old video, and the audio levels were very different for the video and when we were talking, so like they'd have it turned up so you could listen to the debate, and then me and Rob Larson would start talking, it sounded like we were shouting, so we will make sure that somebody in the chat says you look kind of like Patton Oswalt with white hair.
Sure.
So in any case, I don't think we'll have that problem this week because it's it's a much newer video, and I think the audio quality is going to be better. But just in case it does, then if in any case, we'll make sure we fix the audio levels when this goes up on the podcast feed. Can't promise anything one way or the other about right now. The other, somebody in the chat suggests there's a filter that we can apply to the audio so everybody sounds like an adult. I don't think so. Yeah. I think that Ben Shapiro's distinctive tones sound the way that are going to sound the way they sound. There's nothing to be done about that. But but in any case, a few or we could play Ben Shapiro at 0.75 speed. That's a good idea.
There you go. That might actually do it. Yeah.
A couple other things before we get down to the main event tonight. A couple of housekeeping things, a couple of current events things. So one thing for anybody who's watching who might not be aware, so the next episode of the main show is tomorrow night at 7:30. So it's the same time slot it always was, but we're switching to the new live format. And instead of pre-recording it, and Forrest is going to have a bigger on-screen role as producer. So the guest is going to be Richard Wolff, so that should be really good. And, we'll also do a plug in there, a little preview of the first of the patron-only bonus episodes. Haven't quite decided on a good gimmicky name, give them more or something like that. But, so in the new year, so again, the main episode is going to be live, but we're also switching to, a little bit more of, a Chapo kind of format, or like the old TMBS post games, or Dead Pundits B-sides, where there's the main show on Monday night, and then there's a patron bonus episode that comes out on Thursday. So this afternoon, I recorded the first one of those patron bonus episodes with Gene Bajalan on the history and politics of Kurdistan. Really good stuff, really deep dive. So that'll come out for patrons on Thursday. Probably put out a little teaser on the main podcast feed. Then on Wednesday, going to be doing a movie live stream about Mean Streets. So that should be fun. I'm going to try to do that, every Wednesday, the same way we're doing these debate streams every Sunday. And then I guess the last thing before we go into the main thing, since I know that people can't sleep tonight if they don't know what would happen in the leadership vote with Pelosi, and it'll be just tossing and turning all night. So it's I think AOC and a couple others voted no in the first round, and then voted yes on the second round. So it's not, honestly, I think it's an okay outcome. As people will know, since this has dominated all of left media for 3 weeks, because we live in a hell world, that there was a lot of controversy about this. The line I took in the Jacobin piece I wrote about it, and in my discussion with Brianna Joy Gray and Katie Halper's show, is that it wouldn't, like, if you're going to bargain, it doesn't really make sense to me to bargain for a symbolic floor vote where you're going to lose 3-1, because that's the current composition of the House. Because I think right now we have a problem where most people like the idea of Medicare for all. Pollsters call them up and ask them, do you want, national health insurance? They say yes, of course. But most people don't take it seriously as most people don't take it seriously as a possible thing that might really happen. It just sounds like a sort of fanciful, wish list item, which is obviously what we need to change, if we're going to get it. But I think it is where we're starting, we just had an election, and in that election, Bernie Sanders is obviously practically synonymous with Medicare for all. Joe Biden was openly against it more than any of the other major Democratic candidates. He wasn't even trying any triangulating bullshit about Medicare for all who wanted or anything like that. He was just against it. And so even though most Democratic voters, overwhelmingly support Medicare for all, Biden still won, which suggests to me that, since most people don't think it's something that's really going to happen, they're not, like, in order for people to get mad that something's not happening, they have to start out by thinking that it could really happen. And unfortunately, I don't think that's the situation with that right now, which is why, again, Biden mopped up the nomination even when the pandemic had already started, and there were already millions of people losing their employer health insurance. And during the general election, Trump constantly accused Biden of secretly supporting Medicare for all, and he constantly angrily denied it. And it was an unprecedented turnout election, which again suggests to me that that very few voters would actually punish anybody for voting no in a symbolic floor vote on Medicare for all. I wish they did. We'd be living in a much better world if they did, but I don't think they are. So I think that, honestly, I think if it had happened, I understand it's something that, felt like a small victory for the left, which is also why Pelosi was denying it, out of spite. But I think it's something that if it had happened, if anything, it would have been extra ammunition for centrists in primary. Say, look, why is my primary opponent talking about this Medicare for all thing that's so, that's so unrealistic? It failed 3-1 in a Democratic controlled House. I'm talking about these incremental things that might really happen, whatever. So I think it's a long haul that, that the nurses unions, DSA, everybody who's been fighting for it, should obviously continue to fight for it. But I don't think that there's any one neat trick that's going to get, that's going to happen short term. So now that half of the audience has canceled me for saying that, I don't know if you want to lose any friends by chiming in on this, Ryan.
No, I mean, I don't have super strong opinions about this. The only thing that's really striking to me is how passionate people are about this. Like, this seems very much just like a strategic discussion, and I'm not sure. What you say sounds reasonable to me. I'd probably agree with you, but it seems like if someone disagrees with you, it's like we have the same goals. We shouldn't be canceling each other because we have different ideas about the best strategy to get there.
Yeah, that's right. Like, I think it's like honestly, I think it's like a relatively minor tactical disagreement. I think it would do more harm than good. But there are other people who I consider friends and who I respect a lot, like Katie Halper, or, for God's sake, Cornel West, who, if is certainly on the short list of human beings I have the most respect for. Just disagree with me about it, but I mean, I think that it's like, come into any conclusion one way or the other about whether somebody like really secretly doesn't agree with Medicare for all based on what they think the tactical value of this purely symbolic, like parliamentary maneuver seems very strange to me. Like I said, I think I think there is, if it is true, whatever fog of Twitter war, I haven't actually seen this I haven't actually seen any articles about this yet, but if it is true that what I said earlier, that AOC voted against Pelosi in the first round, honestly, I think there'd be some value in her doing more stuff like that to more clearly differentiate them to casual observers. But it's just don't disown it. I guess I will just cheesily say, don't disown too many people over this, or else you're not going to have too much to build from going forward.
This doesn't seem to be a good way to strategy for building a coalition, to start disowning anyone who disagrees with any tactic.
Yeah, absolutely. But what you should disown people for is having the wrong positions on free will and determinism.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We've been kind of more or less half and half for this debate series, doing the more immediately political ones, like the Hitchens versus Hitchens Iraq War debate, and some of the the more abstract philosophical ones, like the Hitchens versus Hitchens God one, or some parts of Chomsky Foucault, or this. So I do want to get to the video pretty quickly, but I should say a couple things about it before we do. And so one is that this, we emphasize the free will part because that is one of the subjects they talk about, and it's Ryan's area that he's written about academically, which is why I thought it'd be fun to talk about it with him. But it is it's a broad ranging it's a broad ranging thing that they also God and morality and whatever. These guys are confused about lots of subjects, not just
that's right. There should be a lot to pick apart here. It might be overwhelming.
Fair enough. But on the free will thing, before we start, if you want to just do a quick I was thinking about how to do this, right? So I think I think maybe one way to approach this, would be this. I think a lot of people, who sort of casually, take some interest in this, think, okay, the question in dispute is, do we have free will, right? Is there some, significant sense in which humans are in control of their own actions? One thing that I'm sure we'll get into is that there's a lot of disambiguation to be done about what sort of significant sense we could be talking about. But is that the case, or do we live in a world where everything that's happened is determined by certain basic physical laws, including human behavior? That human behavior isn't going to be some special magical exception to those laws. So
that's right.
So what's wrong? Like in in like a rudimentary way, right? Like what's without trying to, without trying to do a deep dive about this in the next 3 minutes, from your perspective, what's wrong with the way, the way that way of setting it up.
Yeah, so I mean, I do think that is a very common way of framing it, and I suspect we'll probably see this from Shapiro and Harris, because they're on opposite sides of that way of framing the question. So Shapiro thinks it's obvious we have free will. Harris thinks it's obvious we're just deterministic machines in a larger system, and for them that seems to exhaust the options. But there is a third option that has to be considered that actually has a very long philosophical tradition, which is that both of those things can be true. That to have free will, we don't have to postulate anything magical or anything that's outside the natural world, that we can both be just parts of the universe that operate according to the same laws that govern everything else, whether those are purely deterministic laws or whether there's little bits of quantum randomness mixed in there. And at the same time, we can also really be free, that things can really be up to us, at least in a sense that's important for some of our other concepts, like morality and moral responsibility and praise and blame and love and relationships and all the other things that are closely connected to our concepts of free will. So that's, yeah, so every time I see that, every time I see people just say, oh, these are the two options, let's have it out, you want to stop and say, wait, there's a third thing we have to consider here. There's a third possibility we have to consider here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as we get into it and we see what they have to say about it, and what we think might be wrong with that, we can try to flesh out a little bit more what that third possibility might be. But I am going to, since I'm certainly not going to get through an hour and 20 minutes, or hour and 15 minutes, I guess, of Ben Shapiro, Sam Harris, and Eric Weinstein. He's also part of this. Didn't even mention that in the promotion. So
yeah, I'm curious how much he actually managed to get a word in edgewise with those two. We'll see.
Yeah, so I'm certainly not going to be able to get through an hour plus of Shapiro, Harris, and Weinstein without drinking. So this
yeah.
So this is some nice scotch. This is a Peat Monster Arcana that my wife Jennifer.
You've got the Peat Monster. Nice.
Yeah.
I've got a little bit of just Glenlivet, pretty basic, but it works.
All right. So cheers. We'll get through this.
Cheers. We can do it.
All right, Forrest, let's get it started. Forrest. There. All right. There we go.
Oh, Ryan is a compatibilist, to the person who asked there.
Yes. Okay. Having a problem with the video here? All right, I'm not quite sure what's happening here, but let me here, I can share it myself. If something weird's happening here. Okay. Could people let me know in the comments? Because I don't see it. I just see a still image.
Yeah, all I see is the still image also right now.
Yeah. And I don't hear anything. Forrest, would you share it? By clicking the share computer audio. I know this is riveting TV, but we're going to the podcast version.
Yeah. I'd like to address some comments here. Irish whiskey is the best. No, that's false. It is good. Nothing wrong with Irish whiskey.
Yeah, no, for sure. I've enjoyed a lot of Irish whiskey in my life, but I mean that's just really false.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
there we go.
Sorry for the late start. I'm going to jump right into it because we have a lot to talk about. I've got two guests tonight, and the first is a mathematician. He has a PhD from Harvard, and he has held research positions at Harvard and MIT and Hebrew University and Oxford. You may have heard him before on my podcast. He is one of the most interesting people I have ever met, and honestly, that's saying a lot. And he has, along with his brother, Brett, who I just did a podcast with last night in Seattle, he has become one of the most valuable defenders of free speech in our time. So please welcome Eric Weinstein. Thank you for having me.
I think that's just clapping. It sounds like some insect creatures clapping their wings or something.
He is the editor
Yeah.
of DailyWire.com.
Rather horrifying.
He is the host of the Ben Shapiro Show. So guess his name, which is the top conservative podcast in the nation. He is the author of 7 books, and he has been a nationally syndicated columnist since the age of 17. Pity he got such a late start. He's a graduate of UCLA and Harvard Law School. Please welcome Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, and I should say this is going to be different still images. This is an audio only thing, but we will. But before I didn't hear any sound either, so we're in business now.
So we have a lot to get into here, and there are areas of agreement. I mean, many of you know who these two guys are, and you can imagine the course we're going to chart here. I want to start with Ben because he's had a truly unusual experience, and many of you may not be aware of just how unusual. And this will take us into areas of agreement, Ben, where we definitely agree, which is around the primacy of free speech and how strange our national conversation is on so many topics. So Ben is, if you don't know, is the person who, when he goes to Berkeley, Berkeley University requires $600,000 worth of security to give a speech. We have a little bit less security here tonight, so please behave yourselves. But it's a bit, Ben, what's been going on? What has it been like to be you in the last 2 years?
Confusing. I've always been a little bit bewildered by the scope of the opposition at these college speeches because I don't actually think that my message is supremely controversial. It's pretty mainstream conservative. And yet, when I show up on campuses at Cal State Los Angeles, there was a near riot. When I went to Berkeley, obviously, they required a fair bit of security, thanks to Antifa. And when I was at DePaul University banned me outright. They threatened to arrest me if I set foot on their campus, even though students had invited me. University of Wisconsin actually tried to pass a law banning the heckler's veto, basically, after I spoke at University of Wisconsin. So I think it has far less to do with me than it does with this kind of mood in the country that's so polarized and so praised. And I would say, with regard to college campuses, unique to the political left. I'm not saying a lot of it from the political right. The political right certainly has its own problems at this point in time. But what's going on campuses is something that, I've been speaking on college campuses for most of my career, so 15 years, and only in the last couple have I needed security. The first time I ever required security guards was last year, and now, every place I go, I have to have security guards when it's a public event. So,
and you also, you're getting it from both sides in a way that's completely surreal, because, so for instance, you were often disparaged as a Nazi or a white supremacist, and
yeah,
yet you were
the yarmulke that gives me away on that.
Yeah. But even if you were not going to notice the yarmulke, you were actually the most targeted victim of anti-Semitism in 2016?
Yeah, among journalists on Twitter anyway. Yeah.
It is upside down. And you're also often compared to your former Breitbart colleague, Milo Yiannopoulos, right? And that's an unfortunate pairing, because the reason why I wanted to talk to you is because while I think you and I will disagree about several maybe foundational things, I see you as someone who is sincerely defending a position based on a rational chain of argumentation, based on first principles that we may or may not share. But you're not a performance artist, and that's a crucial distinction.
I mean, that's at least what I'm going for, right? I mean, I've always thought that what I'm trying to do anyway is say things that I think are true, and if they piss you off, they piss you off. But I'm not going in there with the idea I need to piss somebody off to make a headline. That's why I've always found this a little bit puzzling, because there are provocateurs whose job it is to go into a university, say something deliberately provocative just to get a rise out of people and get a headline. And since that really is not my MO, I've been sort of puzzled, frankly, by the level of opposition on all sides. It was a very weird year. I mean, last year was a weird year. I had the alt-right calling me a Black Lives Matter activist, and Black Lives Matter calling me an alt-righter. So it was a unique time. 2016, we're still living in a parallel universe in which Marty McFly actually did not stop Biff from using the sports yearbook.
Well,
I'll give Shapiro points for that.
View that this conversation is really two lenses. It's what most worries you and what most interests you at this point. Let's start with the worry. Where are you at this moment?
Well, I guess for me, I've tried to localize my concern with the breakdown of what I call semi-reliable communal sense-making. If something happens...
It's a very Eric Weinstein phrase.
My Twitter follower count is the orders of magnitude below yours. The idea being that if something happens and everybody in the audience processes it, we will fall into certain clusters, and those clusters are fairly reliable and dependent. And so, to Ben's point that he is both Black Lives Matter and alt-right in the Schrodinger superposition. So what is that? And it has to do with the fact that traditionally we've used institutions to guide our sense-making and to make sense of things collectively, and that has now gone away. And so depending upon what institutions I'm hooked up to, what was my last, where did the Fox, last time descent, I can be at odds with somebody I love, somebody who I've thought about as somebody I've shared a life with, because there's no longer any way to do this communal. And the semi-reliable, I don't think that Walter Cronkite was actually always telling us the truth, but it was in some sense, to first approximation, close enough that there was a national consciousness, belief structure, there was enough shared sort of complex for us to function as a country. I think that that's gone away. So I think this is the parent of the crisis, which I increasingly think of as this, I call it the no-name revolution or the N-squared revolution, where it's
You don't need to pause while I say this, Forrest. We're not missing anything right now, but I do love that, these guys can't get to the high level ideas that matter so much more to them until there's been at least 5 hours of bemoaning.
I mean, this was the exact reason. I used to listen to Sam's podcast fairly regularly. I enjoyed it. He often had interesting things to say. But eventually I just couldn't stand it anymore because every intro was this, him just for 10, 15 minutes, just bemoaning how he can't talk about anything and everyone's unfair to him and he's canceled. And it's like, dude, you've got the biggest podcast in the world. You're doing just fine.
Well, my all-time favorite example of this is there's he did when he talked to he did his debate with Ezra Klein about Charles Murray and the bell curve.
Oh yeah.
Which was a weird thing in itself, because Ezra Klein wanted to actually argue about Charles Murray's ideas, and mostly wanted to whine about the fact that people think that Charles Murray is a bad person, and there's a moment in there that Michael Brooks used to use as one of the regular sound drops on TMBS. Where Harris is saying, we can't talk about Neanderthal DNA anymore.
Right. I mean, you just can't. You'll get canceled if you mention that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, Jesus Christ. All right. Let's keep going.
Growing communications and computation. So there was some real growth, maybe fracking, but in general, what we have is we have a bunch of institutions that used to be capable of honesty that had to develop narratives, and that The problem is we've had as-if growth across the spectrum for most of our adult lives, and that story, which is a fiction, ran out.
You're not one of these anti-capitalists I've been hearing about, are you? You're the managing director of Teal Capital, so that wouldn't be good.
If this gets out, I'm toast.
So is that the,
that's the genesis of it.
I mean, so you actually think economics is the longest lever here that's influencing the machine? I mean, like this breakdown of this failure of polite conversation to get us to converge on a meaningful worldview.
Well, if you chase it all the way up the chain, I mean, markets are in some sense the continuation of natural and sexual selection by other means. And so what you have is that markets take over from...
So it sounds like a very creepy come on line from a
All right, let's pause this for a moment. So
okay. Did I hear him say that markets are the extension of natural selection?
Yeah, that's that.
Okay,
that is what you heard him say.
Okay, all right. Just want to check on that.
Yeah. No, I can understand why, but
yeah.
This also gives Forrest a chance, since we're audio only. I found a link to the direct link to the Making Sense episode, so the audio might at least be a little bit better. They won't. I mean, Ben Shapiro's voice is going to sound the way that Ben Shapiro's voice sounds, and Eric Weinstein isn't going to get any more charismatic. But at least it won't sound like they're underwater. Is my hope. But yeah, that is amazing. That that. I think that might be the ultimate Eric Weinstein thought. Markets are an extension of natural and sexual selection by other means.
Yeah. God. Oh Lord.
This sounds like a very creepy come on line from a.
The night is young. I don't know how to record.
No, that's all right. This is. Let me just acknowledge I'm actually a bad podcast host.
I see.
So you're not with an expert here. You're a good sport.
Yeah, I think that we don't realize that when we look out at the city, that nobody is telling people where to drive, what to do. It's sort of self-organized, with markets being this kind of invisible fabric that keeps us together. And so, it's really important that when growth stops proceeding at the levels that it's expected, people can't form families in real time, so fertility is threatened. People can't plan for coupling and for a future. So I think it gets right into the most intimate details of our lives when the markets don't materialize in the way that we need them.
So what is keeping you up at night?
Well, I worry a lot less about economics as the basis for social collapse. I think it's easy to overstate the extent to which growth has stagnated. I mean, we are at 4% unemployment. The economy is not. I mean, this is not 1935. This is not even 1975. There's still significant economic growth. To me, it seems like the social fabric has been completely ripped apart, and some of that is due to social media and the fact that we coordinate with each other in a different way. But I think a lot of it has to do with loss of common values, like even the ability to have a common conversation. In order to have a conversation with one another, we have to take certain things for granted, like human reason, like objective truth. If we don't take these basic things, at least for granted, then how are we even speaking the same language? And it seems to me that a lot of those things have disappeared in favor of radical subjectivism that may make us feel good, but doesn't provide the common framework for a conversation. And objective truth goes by the wayside, because if we can't agree on the facts, how are we going to have a conversation? You see this particularly in our politics, where it seems like there's two bubbles that have been created. And if you read Huffington Post, you are in a completely different world than if you read Breitbart. Right. And my mom actually first noticed this in 2012, because she said, I was working at Breitbart at the time, and she said, well, it looks like from Breitbart, Romney's definitely going to win. I was like, yeah, he's definitely going to win. And then all my friends at work read Huffington Post, and they say that Obama's definitely going to win. And I don't know who to believe. And I said, well, I really don't know who to believe either, because no one knows the answer to that question. But you can see that it's broken down in incredibly radical ways now, because even things where there should be a common basis of fact, people are disagreeing on. Right? So to take the Senate race in Alabama, right? There's pretty good, reliable accounts that the Republican candidate in that race is likely guilty of some form of sexual abuse of underage girls. And a huge percentage of the Republican base, my party, my group, a huge percentage of them will outright deny that that's the case, because they'll say this is a witch hunt. People are out to get Roy Moore. It's a conspiratorial attack on Roy Moore. So that's one example from the right. Then on the left, you'll have examples where you will say things that are biologically true. Take a controversial example, like there is a male sex and there is a female sex. And if you say that, then people will lose their minds because you're somehow insulting their subjectivity. And when you do that, it's hard to have a conversation because people will change the terms they're using. They'll change the frame of reference they're using. And and then they'll toss reason out altogether. They'll say, your specific bias as a person prevents you from even having a reasonable conversation, right? Your white privilege or your background or your ethnicity or all of this prevents us from even discussing on a one-on-one level. Like, I can recognize my background and having an impact on how I think, but if that is supposed to be a conversation stopper, then how exactly are we supposed to have a conversation?
Yeah, so that's why identity politics is so toxic in my view, because if identity is paramount, communication is impossible.
Exactly.
Because you haven't shared my specific experience, or because you don't have the same skin color, you're not the same gender, there's no bridge between us, right? And there's no chain of reasoning from you to me that should trump anything I currently think, because what I think is anchored to identity.
Exactly.
And we don't share an identity.
Yeah, well, we're atomized individuals kind of bouncing off one another as opposed to being able to form some sort of molecular bond.
Yeah.
And I think that's completely, it seems like that's completely collapsed.
Right. And it is.
All right.
This is really heartwarming to me. I'm just glad they have so much in common. They both understand that identity politics and postmodernism is to blame for every problem in our society.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And like, even though just like to remember this, Sam Harris's preferred mode of presentation, which is if you read Against the Web, there's the Sam Harris chapter in there is really good, and in that book, he talks about, I think there's some phrase, I don't remember if this made it into the published version, but certainly some drafters read. There's a phrase about how Sam Harris, like, it's this, it's like news from nowhere. It's like, he's in a very soothing voice, like a guided meditation video. He's going to tell you what the objective, rational, scientific truth is about the world. And Ben Shapiro is a religious fundamentalist who believes that there can't be a Palestinian state because God gave Israel the Jewish people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and I guess also, I mean, I should say, right, like, there are bits of what Little Ben is saying there that are true, right?
Yeah, I mean,
and there are, there's a version of some of these thoughts that could, like if you read, like, Hate Inc. by Matt Taibbi, he some of the media breakdown stuff, that he talks about in there, there are echoes with that in what Ben Shapiro is saying here. But one thing for like two things on track before throwing a riot are just one, like he just immediately dismisses like any kind of economic explanation of social conflict. It's all the postmodernism. Which, like all those, goddamn kids just reading Derrida all the time. That's the
that's
he, like, when he's talking about people who read Huffington Post are living in this totally different epistemic world for the people reading reading Breitbart. It's like, Jesus Christ, whose fault is that?
Yeah, right. I mean, this is the guy who started his career at Breitbart, helping to polarize our society to the best of his ability. No, I agree with you. I mean, there's some elements of truth to this, absolutely, but it's just way overstating the case. And Yeah, and I really like that Weinstein tried to make some kind of economic argument, and then that just got nothing, like no response whatsoever. Just nope. It's purely
it's all
it's purely identity politics. It's purely postmodernism. That's it.
Yeah, which are also, for whatever it's worth, not at all, not at all the same thing, but whatever.
Well, yeah, never mind that. Yeah, never mind that. Yeah, and yeah, it's just if anyone could use a little more identity politics, it's Sam Harris. I mean, I agree. Sometimes it can turn, sometimes the way people use it, it can be a conversation stopper, like Shapiro said. But
well, I mean, ironically, like Shapiro was drawing the right distinction there for a minute, right? Which is that there's okay, it shouldn't be a conversation stopper, but it is sometimes worth thinking about the ways that your point of view could influence what you might miss, and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But then he sort of like he just breezes right past that. He's like acknowledges it so he can say he's acknowledged it, and then he moves on.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. It could take 5 minutes to think about how that could apply to to the fact that basically you have ignoring Weinstein, because they certainly are. You have in Shapiro and Harris, two guys who both come from fairly affluent, white, suburban Jewish kinds of backgrounds, and who are when I used the phrase news from nowhere earlier, I mean, I just meant just kind of like being, I think, having more pretense than you could really justify to being like not having a dog in some of these fights, that they're very unbothered, certainly by U.S. foreign policy, when Shapiro, as young as he still sounds, but when he was much younger, and he got to start as like a teenage conservative wunderkind, it was justified in Iraq, and they're certainly all for and they both they're both very dismissive of any kind of like complaints about Palestine, and but they're very concerned about the woke college kids,
that's right. They're both also very very closely aligned on like Black Lives Matter as a terrorist organization. And I mean, I know Harris had a whole podcast at some point in the summer about Black Lives Matter and him trying to debunk the idea that there's any sort of systemic problems in the way that the police treat African Americans. And that's a moment where like maybe a little identity politics would help you. Like maybe maybe it's not a coincidence that these two guys who are otherwise very different politically, but who come from very similar backgrounds, maybe there's a reason why they are both so dismissive of the of the kinds of things that disadvantaged populations say they experience with police and with other issues, right? Like,
you could have a little identity politics as a trait. Maybe as a necessary correct. Again, I mean, Shapiro is not incorrect on paper. Like it is often true as a conversation stopper, and it shouldn't be. But
sure, absolutely, that happens. But
it is also worth taking the 5 minutes that neither of these guys have clearly ever taken, to consider you might be whether you might be missing something in this.
Like maybe all of these Black people who describe a different experience, maybe they have experienced something that I haven't. And
and also, like, I don't know, some of that stuff is just so overblown. It's like so people will get like furious at me if I acknowledge that biological sex differences exist. Like, really? I don't know. I mean, like maybe like a few people will, but I mean, I don't really think that that's like the main objection that most people have to your position on this stuff. I think that I mean, there's a kind of theoretical discussion we can have about whether, since biological sex isn't cleanly binary, does that what does that mean about what we should is there still like a meaningful distinction there, all that stuff. But it's like, also, I think what most people, including most trans activists, care more most about is not what you think about like the metaphysics of of biological sex. It's whether you think that, you should be like interpersonally respectful and call people what they want to call, called, and extend civil rights legislation so people can't be discriminated against in jobs and housing, and all of that stuff, right? Like, I think that's where most people's priorities are at, and like, so like it really is kind of a Mod and Bailey thing, that like, when challenged, just retreat to.
This isn't a debate about human rights. This is a debate about science. That's all we're talking about. They pretend, right?
Exactly. That as if like all anybody was arguing about was whether chromosomes exist, not like what like civil rights laws should be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, let's keep going. Let's see if we can power through the part about the evils of the woke college kids and get to the philosophy.
Yeah,
we're headed there anyway. I mean, obviously Fox News and the fragmentation of media precedes social media. So we had our echo chamber.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't think it's social media. And there's a study that came out from, I think it was Harvard, actually, reported by the New York Times, talking about how the impact of social media on polarization is overstated. That if you look at the most polarized populations in the country, it's actually older people. That people who are older are more polarized politically and are having fewer conversations with people on the other side of the aisle than younger people. And younger people are obviously more apt to use social media. I really don't think it's that. I think that there is a ground shift in the way people think that's taken place even within our lifetime and is gained steam. And as I say, even basic concepts like reason are being thrown out in favor of a philosophy of feeling, because maybe it does come down to lack of success for people. Maybe people do feel that they can't succeed in other ways. And so the way that they feel fulfilled, the way that they feel whatever need they have for fulfillment is by wallowing in themselves. If I can't find fulfillment in the outer world, then I will look inside me and I will look at what makes me special. And we've all been taught that we're special by Barney. And therefore, since we are all special, then you saying anything that disagrees with me is taking away my specialness. And that can't be infringed upon.
You can actually try to look at the history of these ideas. Like, for example, you mentioned white privilege. And I, at some point, tried to track it down, and there's some 2-page, it's not even an academic paper, it's unpacking the knapsack in the late 80s coming out of Wellesley. Or, intersectionality comes out of apparently UCLA Law School. A lot of these ideas actually began as kind of minor, interesting ideas, heuristics, that couldn't support an entire epistemology. And what happened was that you had some sort of vaguely approximate concepts that got pushed so far beyond their domain of applicability that they led to a kind of madness when they became sort of the substrate for thought. You can't really have conversations where white privilege is a barrier. If Ben has a drinking problem and I have a gambling problem, we may not be able to understand each other's addictions directly, but if I think about Ben's problem,
I asked you not to talk about that publicly.
Step one, admit that you've got a problem. The issue is that this idea of being able to hack empathy and hack understanding by using our own personal experiences, our lived experience, to use the jargon, and the felt experience, in order to empathize across these dividing lines, shows this incredible failure of imagination. It's as if there was no screenwriter who was able to write both male and female characters that men and women, identify with. And so I think it has to do with pushing interesting but very limited heuristics so far beyond their domain of applicability. You can track each one of these things using Google Ngrams to find out where they came from.
Right. It seems to me that we're struggling, and it's not just us, all of us are struggling to find a way to capture meaning and value in the context of a rational worldview. And I think that is a challenge that just doesn't go away. That is a kind of a perpetual challenge insofar as we understand the situation we're in. We need to find ways of talking about that so as to converge with a basic life plan with 7 billion strangers. And I mean, one difference between us is what we think the value of religion is in that picture. So just to get a little bit of the context here, you're an Orthodox Jew. What does that actually commit you to with respect to belief? I mean, what do you believe that I don't believe that is salient here?
Okay, so
I'm an atheist. So
Well, let's see.
In case you hadn't
that
heard,
gives you a clue. Yeah,
this is.
I hadn't picked up on that. This is going to be so awkward
interview.
now.
Yeah.
You kids have fun.
This is Ali G. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I believe in a creator of the universe. I believe that he set certain guidelines for human behavior, that he cares what happens to us. I believe that he endowed us with, in an American sense, certain inalienable rights that accrue to us as virtue of being human. But from a Judaic perspective, which doesn't really impact public policy so much. One of the reasons that I think we can have a conversation is that when it comes to
Except for Palestine.
right, it's possible to for biblical text, which means I almost never do. Mainly because what would an appeal to authority that you don't believe in do? I mean, it's a waste of time. So in the areas where I think we can actually have a conversation, where we're not talking about the value of kashrut or keeping Sabbath, which I think has very little relevant input for public policy and the kind of social fabric building that we're talking about doing. The stuff that I think is important where we disagree is man made in God's image, created, taking the premise by faith that God created us with certain inalienable rights, endowed us with the capacity to choose, endowed us with the capacity to reason, and cares about what happens to us.
Right. So,
not sure if you can say right any more cynically there, but
well,
one word can do so much.
Unintended, but
and yet.
So, I mean, so what I'm interested in is in a worldview that could be rebooted or rediscovered now. I mean, just imagine we lost all of our, we had all the libraries burned, the internet went down, we lost all of our texts. How would someone rediscover this thing? Now, we can make an easy case that we could rediscover science. It might take some time, but if the literature of Judaism, in your case, were lost, it seems to me patently obvious that whatever is true about reality is still there to be discovered. And if there's some part of reality that is ethical or spiritual or divine or spooky, it's there. It is there to be discovered by sentient creatures such as ourselves. So, how would you reboot religion, the religion that's true? Because you are by accident born a Jew,
right?
And there's there are a billion people in India who weren't, and I must imagine that on your account they have, by sheer bad luck, the wrong version of this story.
Well, I mean, so Judaism is actually not quite as exclusive as a lot of other religions with regard to this. I mean, Judaism actually says that as long as you fulfill 7 basic commandments, like don't kill people, don't steal, don't eat the flesh of a living animal, that you actually have a pathway into heaven. So Judaism is not particularly exclusive, and we actually try to discourage converts. So it's not quite the same as some of the other converting religions. As far as what's discoverable, I would agree with you. If the Torah were to disappear tomorrow, it would not be discoverable, which is why there is a necessity for revelation in the Jewish view, right?
So this is, I realize, a little nitpicky, but one of those 7 basic laws that Gentiles have to follow is not worshiping idols. So all the people that Sam Harris just referred to, I mean, if you are committing the sin of having been born into a non-monotheistic religion, so they're still disqualified. I mean, this is a pretty whatever. Just like
that. That seems not too nitpicky. Like the fate of the souls of a billion plus people, seems relevant. So yes, those Hindus are in fact very, very unlucky not to have been born where Shapiro was.
Exactly.
Revelation was necessary, not that revelation was unnecessary, and that if people had not been graced with revelation, they would have come to this on their own.
But the principles you just gave me, you don't think those are discoverable?
Those are discoverable, right? So these are and that's the reason why I say that I think that the principles that are granted through revelation are not necessarily. I think that they caused a ground shift historically from certain ways of thought to other ways of thought. Like the advent of Judeo-Christian thought changed the way of thinking. But I think that they are also things that you can discover through contemplation, for example. So all of the things that I said about free will and reason and the presence of an unmoved mover, that's more Aristotelian than it is Judeo-Christian.
Right.
And that is stuff that was essentially discovered through philosophy, not through revelation. So that is the stuff when I talk about the necessity for reason, that's the stuff I think that is more relevant. Now, I think that you do need a religious system in order to inform people who are not going to sit around philosophizing all day what are good and bad modes of behavior.
Right.
And, Voltaire thought the same. So I think that the notion of a dual...
But is it important to believe that those good and bad modes were approved of or discouraged by an omniscient being? I mean, can't we just chart a course toward greater fulfillment, greater peaceful collaboration based on just an intelligent analysis of what it is to be social beings?
I don't think you can unless you're willing to acknowledge that reason, the capacity to choose, the capacity to act in the world, that these things exist, and that has to be done based on assumption, because you actually oppose some of these things, right? Like you don't think free will exists.
Yeah, but I also don't think you need free will to live a moral life.
Right, I've never really understood that position, so we'll have to get into it. But,
all right, we'll get there.
To me, if you're going to have a conversation with someone and convince them, then we need to agree on the value of reason. The value of reason is not something that evolutionary biology suggests. Right? What does reason have to do with evolutionary biology per se? It's a mode of action that is more likely to preserve your species. It doesn't create objective truth. The notion of an objective truth that exists apart from you and would exist whether or not you were living. This is not something that can necessarily be gathered from science alone. Right? You have to make certain assumptions about the universe and the way that your mind reflects what is present in the universe, right? As Kant would argue.
Well,
so
it's true that an evolutionary perspective on ourselves suggests that we have not evolved to know reality perfectly. I mean, if you believe that we are apes that have been selected for, and all of our cognitive architecture is built by virtue of its adaptive advantage in evolutionary terms, yes, it's hard to believe that we are perfectly designed to do mathematics or anything else that is
but you do feel that we can still gather objective truth.
But that even that picture suggests a wider context of minds more powerful than our own that could have evolved, or our own future minds. I mean, there's no...
why would you appeal to minds that have not yet evolved, or future minds, as opposed to just a creator who put us here with certain capacities?
Well, no, because that I would argue we don't have any evidence for. What we do have evidence for is that we're here. We understand a lot about the mechanism that is operating now that got us here and that is causing us to be the way we are. We can see our relationship to other life forms. We know that we can look at chimps that share 99% of our DNA, and they obviously share a lot of the evolved precursors of our own social and cognitive architecture, but they have no idea what we're up to, right? So they're cognitively closed to most of what we're doing and most of what we care about. And by analogy, we know that we could be cognitively closed to what we might be capable of in 1,000 years now. I mean, that our sense of what engagement with the cosmos promises.
But I guess the argument is if you're arguing that we're cognitively close to certain things, then why are you arguing which specific things we are cognitively close to?
No, I'm just saying that once you admit it's possible to not know what you're missing, factually, ethically, spiritually. I mean, in any domain of inquiry, it's possible to come up against a horizon line where the known meets the unknown.
You sound kind of religious here.
Well, you wouldn't be the first to say it, but it's clearly possible not to know what you're missing. And if you kill,
I agree. You should come with me to synagogue.
If you kill the 100,
I tried that already.
Yeah. But I mean, if you kill the 100 smartest mathematicians on Earth right now,
mm-hmm.
you would,
Eric, you're in trouble.
You would close the door to certain conversations, maybe for 200 years.
Right.
So
I'm not a mathematician.
By analogy, it would be just sheer hubris to think that the 7 billion of us who are currently here, collectively or any one individually, have pushed the human conversation to the limit of what's rationally apprehendable about the universe. So we know there's more out there in every sense. So what you're imagining is that
not every sense, right?
Well, no, in every sense that, I mean, this is why from
really, I'm going to have you over for Sabbath.
Yeah, no, but from the atheist perspective, or from the perspective of not being convinced of any religion, this is what's so limiting about this notion of revelation, because what you have, you're anchoring a worldview to a book that we just know by the time of its composition and by its actual contents can't subsume
Right. So you're
the larger worldview that we're gathering every day.
So you're arguing past me a little bit, right? Because the argument that I was making was based on an Aristotelian philosophical view of an unmoved mover and certain properties that we have to have as human beings in order to create a civilization. And you're arguing back to Revelation, which I freely admitted that if Revelation were to be destroyed tomorrow, I could not recreate the Torah from memory. Right.
Well, no, it's not a matter of not being able to recreate it. It's just what is its importance apart from being one among millions of books that have inspired people to.
Well, I mean, the importance of Judeo-Christian revelation in our particular context is it is the creator of the entire chain of events, or it is at least the progenitor, along with Greek thought largely, of an entire chain of events and thought that lead to the establishment of the modern science that you rely upon. That's a set of historical contingencies that are. But they're not coincidences. They are contingencies.
Well, no, but there was no one else. I mean, my argument here is that you could also say that virtually everything that has been accomplished in human history was accomplished by people who didn't know a damn thing about biology, right? Like there was no one else to do the job. Every bridge that was built,
that's true.
Every beautiful building that was built by somebody who knew nothing about DNA. Right? Okay. But that's not an argument that ignorance of molecular biology is a good thing, or that it should be maintained.
And I'm not arguing that ignorance is a positive. What I'm arguing is that.
Well, no, but I would say that any kind of religious sectarianism is a species of ignorance now that we should be. I mean, that's outgrowing. That's again an assumption that you're making based on premises that I don't necessarily agree with. But on your account, the Hindus have to have it wrong. I mean, they're worshiping an elephant-headed god and a monkey god, and
I do think I don't think everybody is right. I mean, I do think that the Hindus are not correct. Otherwise, it wouldn't be Jewish, right? I mean, like this.
But that's what I'm fishing for. What's the significance if you're going to go to Aristotle and you're going to go to 7 precepts that anyone could discover so as to lead a well-ordered life? What is the significance of being Jewish?
So the significance of being Jewish is that even the foundations of what Aristotle believed that he's trying to arrive at logically have to be undergirded by a faith in a God who also provides us some level of moral guidance, because even the precepts of Aristotle are too broad to actually create the civilization upon which we stand. Meaning, this is not a Greek civilization. This is a Greek/Judeo-Christian civilization. It's the Athens and Jerusalem in the typical phraseology. And if you just knock out the pillar of Jerusalem, then you're ignoring the impact that Jerusalem has on Athens and that Athens has on Jerusalem, historically speaking.
Well, this is kind of reminding me of the moment when I debated Rick Warren once at Saddleback, just in his office. It was just the two of us and John Meacham, who was moderating, and he was telling me that basically without God, people would just be raping and killing, and that you require this as an anchor for an ethical life. And he even said of himself, I mean, I don't believe this when anyone says this, but this is sort of the bluff that never gets called. He said of himself that if he didn't believe there was a hell, he would be raping and killing. And
I don't agree with that. Right. That's actually not right. Something that I fully agree with. But I do agree with the idea that without
I'm glad to hear that.
Fair enough. But but what I do believe is that a scientific materialist worldview cannot construct a moral system, because is has nothing to do with ought. Science is about is and has no capacity to say anything about ought other than constructions that are based in a notion of free will that you yourself reject.
Okay. I'm happy to get into all of that. Right. Time is.
So I guess that's the transition of free will, but there are a few things I want to talk about here, and we can't let that business about is and ought go. This is. Because this is Ben Shapiro's entire shtick is ignoring that distinction. He did it earlier with with the jump from that there are biological sex differences to we shouldn't have you shouldn't call trans people by their preferred pronouns or extend civil rights laws to cover them. He does it, and there's a wonderful interview last year that he did with Andrew Neil at the BBC, who's actually a extremely conservative person, is like a right-wing Tory who supported the Iraq War and doesn't believe in climate change, which and all that stuff. But he was kind of taking Shapiro to task for suddenly claiming to be really concerned about polarization and all that, and pointing out his own continuing record of supporting like really extreme right-wing culture war positions. And there's a point in that interview before Shapiro gets pissed off and and accuses Neil of being a liberal and walks out, when Neil brings up these draconian abortion laws in Georgia, with like really stiff penalties, for having abortions at various times in pregnancy, and he says, "Why do you believe this?" And Shapiro says, "Because science. Science is my reason."
Because that's right. And he's kind of doing it here too. I mean, he's kind of being slippery. Like in some modes, he's and Harris is kind of trying to pin him down on this. Like in some modes, he's suggesting, well, you just need to believe in some kind of God in order to get civilization going. But then in other moments, he's suggesting, no, you have to believe in the Judeo-Christian God in order to get any kind of morality going. And there he's again appealing to a descriptive claim. Like, well, historically, Judeo-Christian thinking, he argues. I mean, he's not really making a good historical argument for this, but he's saying we wouldn't have our particular society without these specific historical facts. And as Harris rightly points out, like, so what? That's contingent. You can't slip from the way things were historically to any particular conclusions about the way things should be.
Yeah. Well, right. It's also such a weird claim, because
I mean, descriptively, he's
like even just the descriptive premise is a little weird. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I lived in South Korea for 3 years. Only less than a third of the population is Christian. Most people are Buddhists and have traditional practices, but they seem to know about science. I don't know. Like that's like
somehow it seems like Eastern societies were doing a lot of science, and they were doing astronomy, they were developing mathematics, they were inventing gunpowder and fireworks centuries ahead of the Europeans somehow, without Judeo-Christian influence. Very strange.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, the idea that like in a world where Europe hadn't existed, that like Asia never would have made it to to modern science seems like at least the kind of thing that if you want to argue that, then I think the burden of proof is definitely on you to think there's some good reason to think that that's true, but also like, okay, let's say it is true. Like what it like, and like if it's the case that this is the only historical pathway that could have led to to these developments, then I guess we're lucky that it happened, but I don't know what it's supposed to tell us about what we should believe now.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing follows from that.
Yeah. So Ben Shapiro's claim, like again, he believes that there's an it-odd distinction when it's convenient, for his arguments against Sam Harris, but when he's saying that science says that first trimester fetuses are alive and genetically human, therefore they have a moral right to life. Then he clearly doesn't believe it when he's making these very weird claims. Yeah, this whole Athens and Jerusalem thing. It's like, so it's like he got that. Like, I don't know. The whole thing has a very. I mean, I guess maybe this is like a ivory tower elitist comment, but like like the whole thing has a very like ninth grade book report feel to it. Like
it does. Yeah, I mean, I don't know this history a lot. I mean, I know like what Paul went to Athens, but I mean, like how much did they actually influence Athenian thought? Like,
right.
I suspect not a lot.
Right. I mean, clearly, right. So clearly, most of the history of ancient Greek philosophy is before it has any meaningful contact, and vice versa. I mean, you say, okay, these things are both obviously important cultural influences on like medieval and then modern Europe, no doubt about that. Although also like the weird thing, if you read Ben's book, The Right Side of History, where he had, for my sins, I have actually read that whole thing where he develops this claim.
I'm sorry.
It's like, what are the, like, so he says this thing about these two influences from Greek philosophy, which, by the way, in Ben Shapiro's like handling of it, like Greece or, Greek philosophy or anything like that just means Aristotle.
Right.
And Aristotle just means this like 5-paragraph book report conception that he has of what Aristotle says.
Right. Right. Just Aristotle as the proto-Catholic, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, proto-Thomist Aristotle.
Yeah.
And, which is like also, yeah. And then like this idea, and so the weird thing in that book is that, is they says, okay, these two influences coming together is what defines, the West, right? The subtitle of the book is How Reason and Moral Purpose Made the West Great. And he, constantly uses this phrase, Judeo-Christian, which is, I mean, I think if not for, his particular accent of birth, he could at least have a more coherent story by just saying Christian.
Yeah.
For 99.999% of the history that he's talking about. Especially because the weird thing about it is that, okay, the West, Western civilization, Judeo-Christian civilization is supposed to be defined by these two influences. But the one thing that's, I think, most crucially supposed to be left out, because honestly, I don't think that Ben Shapiro spends a lot of, very much of his, time or emotional energy worrying about, Buddhists and Hindus. The thing that he mostly means to leave out when he talks about Western civilization is Islam, which also is deeply influenced by those two sources. So
absolutely, yeah.
Like I never understood that part. And then with the Athens part, this idea that like that some sort of basic, I don't know, generic theist worldview is something that's discoverable from philosophy. Is just just seems very straight. Like,
yeah.
I mean, like, you really think that's the order of causation here? That that people started believing this stuff, because because they read about like Aristotle's argument about the prime mover, like that's how the belief itself originates.
Yeah, I don't know if he's even arguing that. I mean, he seems to kind of admit that for most people it might just be just revelation and faith is enough to do it. But he seems to want to argue that in principle, if you wanted to do enough philosophy, then you could figure out enough to not be a rapist and a murderer, because you'd figure out that there's a first mover, and I guess that's enough to stop you from killing people. I don't know.
Yeah, which is actually right. So this is also related to the Azot distinction, of course. Since what the relationship between those two things is supposed to be. I mean, like something else actually that's like from a bit of Greek philosophy, that in that book, at least, Ben Shapiro shows no signs of having heard of, although it's from Plato. Is the Euthyphro argument, which says that basically the gist of the argument is that there's no that it doesn't really make sense to say that we can determine what's valuable or not, by how the gods feel about it.
Yeah.
Because if you did think there was some sort of relationship there, then okay, well, what if the gods approved of other stuff, right? Then should you think that that's morally that's morally good, and if you say that they don't, that they wouldn't, right? Then that suggests some antecedent standard of moral goodness. And also, by the way, like, to his credit, I mean, I don't think Aristotle's, actually suggesting anywhere like that, that there is any particular relation, like any particular relationship between what he regards as moral virtues and the existence of a prime mover. I mean, any connection there is pretty indirect.
That's right. Yeah, that's not important for him.
Yeah.
In terms of morality. Yeah.
Yeah. And it should be even less important, like, honestly, like, it should be even less important for us if we think, you know, that, you know, if, you know, well, so you know, you know, if you think about, like, okay, if this is what, like, the sort of universal moral, you know, moral laws, which are what count, which remember, like, actually map on very awkwardly to his stated theology, because again, one of those 7 laws of Noah is not, you know, worshiping false idols, and like, one thing that's nowhere in you know, Aristotle's, you know, argument about a prime mover is therefore all none of the gods that people believe in ancient Greece really exist. It doesn't really seem that's discoverable that way.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, and also the not eating living animals thing. Like, I guess that's what, like, not eating oysters. Like, I you know, that's going to rule out a lot of people too. And I don't see how you get to that from just pure reason.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. There are lots of cultures where people do eat things that are, you know, like, it's you know, where you have, like, some weird little, you know, bug that's still squirming around or something. And I don't know. I mean, I have no idea what the a priori moral argument is supposed to be. That's, you know, supposed to, you know, like, get us to not do that exactly. You know, at least, you know, and at least if, you know, eating it doesn't cause any more pain than whatever you do to kill it, you know. But
right, yeah.
And then
I mean, I'm okay with. I can see how you might get to, like, don't eat a cow while it's still alive, but
sure.
Right. An oyster.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, the reason
that you're always focused on what is, to my way of thinking, very clearly a form of Judaism expressed as atheism.
That really does sound anti-Semitic somehow. I'll have to ask my rabbi how I just got insulted.
I don't know, Sam, how much you're being paid tonight?
And, you know, as much as I take a scientific worldview, I find that if I'm really honest with myself, I have a lot of certainly dialectical tensions that I can't resolve, needs for meaning that I can't find easily met within the rational systems. I think that the is and ought is a good distinction. I think a lot of this has to do with pre-existing architecture that predisposes us, even though our rational minds may know better, towards something that functions very much in an as-if religious context.
Well, let's just take is and ought for a second, because I mean, here's one way those two things collapse for me. If understanding how the universe is altogether, you know, all the possibilities of experience, all the ways minds emerge, all of the kinds of good lives and bad lives, and all of the mechanisms that would determine one path over another, a complete understanding of the mind and the cosmos. That's all the is there that is there to be understood. If understanding that couldn't give you a complete picture of what you ought to do, where would you go to get that picture? If you sum all the facts, how does that not give you a way to chart your course in this universe?
Well,
what else is there to inform your life?
Well, there are these things that we notice in our minds that we can, you know, that run through our fingers like quicksilver, that aren't exactly facts, these intuitions, these things that gnaw at us. Even though we know the answer, we feel superstitious, we feel guilt. You know, how economists talk about utility as a one-dimensional object, but how many kinds of utility and disutility? I can be happy, I can be interested, I can be fulfilled, you know, all these different ways of tagging, you know, utilities and disutilities. And if you just notice your mind, you'll notice that there are all sorts of things going on in it that really aren't about facts. And I don't know where they originate, neither do you.
But see, but to just translate what you're saying, sure. I mean, how I'm hearing what you're saying, you're telling me facts about the mind, which I agree with. I mean, there's kind of a Congress in there.
You guys decided that there was like objective reality when you were having that conversation, and and I suppose that there's probably objective reality, but I think that a lot of what goes on is that we've been in the shallow end of science, where more or less, me and let's say this gentleman over here share enough that we can probably agree that the square root of 2 is provably irrational. I believe that that's probably an objective fact, but I don't believe proof checking is objective, because we have things like the Amabi problem that sit in the literature for years, and we think it's proved, but it turns out we didn't have the right proof. So we have situations in which we've been picking low-hanging, easy fruit to console ourselves that we can all get at the objective reality. We've all seen optical illusions where
can we pause for a second,
wavelength, but it looks 2 different ways because of the surroundings.
Okay, but so that's best.
I think it's just worth noting here. So it seems like Weinstein's making this like really, really basic error that I hear students make all the time whenever we want to talk about, are there usually in the context of morality, but in other contexts too, like, are there objective facts here? So he's slipping from, well, there can be disagreement on this topic and we can make mistakes on a topic, to therefore there are no objective facts, like slipping from the epistemological claim to the metaphysical claim. That's a really basic mistake for someone like him to be making. Like, yeah, sometimes we're wrong about these things, but we can often be wrong about objective facts.
Yeah, well, in fact, like if you say we're wrong, then that implies
presupposes,
otherwise, like, what are we wrong about, right?
Exactly.
So like when he says like, that this like bad proof was in the literature for years, and then like people realize their mistake. I mean, that certainly suggests that, whatever you want to say about that, that doesn't seem like a reason to think that the standard by which you decided it was a mistake and it was wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's really strange. When he started, I thought he was maybe going to make an interesting argument to critique Sam Harris's, attempt to collapse the is-out distinction, but then he just goes right into this like weird mysticism, like, well, there's these magical things that slip through your fingers like quicksilver, and there's no objective truth, or maybe there's objective truth. I don't know, but
yeah, it was really weird. Like, I mean, it was basically, again, it was the perfect Weinstein brothers thought, because it was he was incredibly garbled, but also really confident and also really pretentious. The only mistake you can come up with is this like obscure mathematical proof. I mean, but the start was good. Like before he immediately switched to, like he did this thing where he sort of said, there are also and then he went to superstition, relativism, and mysticism, and all this other stuff that wasn't doing him any good. But at the beginning of it, it seemed like what he was going to say would be the correct point, right? Which would be that we have, that we have moral intuitions, and that we can. So we have impulses about what we want to happen that are separate from our evaluations of the facts of what have happened.
That's the correct answer. It's like, you get all the facts, and then you apply your intuitions and your values and the things you care about. You say, given the facts, what should we do? Which of these values should we try to maximize?
And Harris is doing what he always does, right? Which is to say, like, the facts can tell us all these things about, good and bad outcomes, how to chart possible courses. It's like, well, okay, but there is an incredibly basic distinction here, which is, yes, the facts, like there's all sorts of factual information that can tell you what the different possible outcomes are, but that's a different question from whether you think some of these outcomes are good and some of them are bad.
Exactly.
And he just, he just steadfastly, like, basically the trick is always that like the premise that's a little bit off stage, or it'll be briefly on stage, is okay, so science can tell you like what the different possible outcomes are, and utilitarianism is obviously right. So,
yeah.
oh, come on, I know this is a reference that really dates me, but it's like the Seinfeld, you're yada yada in the best part. You're just skipping through, you're just really quickly, hand-wavily doing the thing that's actually philosophically controversial, which is which things are right, things are wrong.
Yeah. Like where all the interesting work is done is there.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, bad job to everybody on this part, but let's keep going.
Let's linger there for a second.
So again, we thought we knew what we were talking about, and then we find out at a deeper level that we didn't, and then we think we know what we're talking about again, and then it can reverse again.
But that move to the deeper level is more facts, it's more context, it's more objectivity.
Right, but we already agreed on something that turned out not to be true as objective fact. And then so the point is that I'm not entirely sure in any of these. Like if I take this irrationality of the square root of 2, there's a concept called not worth worrying about.
Well, that does a lot of work.
It's just not worth worrying about whether or not somebody's going to find a mistake in that proof because it's so short. When it comes to something like the ABC conjecture, it's been going on for how many years? We still haven't, gotten our arms around it. We're now not in the shallow end quite so much. And so my concern is that it doesn't do a lot of damage to say we can prove that the square root of 2 is irrational and that's an objective fact up until you start trying to extend that, to more and more complicated proofs. And then it actually matters that the original concept was the outside proof may exist, but proof checking isn't objective, and therefore we may never exactly know, but there are things that aren't worth worrying about, and we call them objective fact for convenience. Sorry.
All right, so let me make an objective, what I think is an objective claim of fact that I think has moral, that you won't agree with, Ben, that I think has moral consequence that we should grapple with. So it connects to a very real world issue like wealth inequality, right? So wealth inequality is a problem if you think it's a problem, or it's inevitable if you think it's inevitable, but I think everyone would agree that some level of wealth inequality would be intolerable and that we would want to correct for it. But wealth inequality is just one kind of inequality. There's every other kind of inequality. And there's this fact that none of us, and this goes to the free will issue. So what we imagine is that people, they have a certain inheritance. They have their genes. They have their environments. You didn't pick the fact that you weren't born yesterday in Syria. You were born in a stable society when you were born. We can't truly own all of our advantages. We didn't make ourselves. But most people feel that there's something like a ghost in the machine that has free will that can make the best of even a bad situation. Now, I think you probably agree that some situations are so bad that the deck can be so stacked against you that it's just life is unfair. Here are claims about you that I think are true and have kind of should be morally salient. You didn't make yourself. You didn't determine anything about yourself that you would use as an exercise of your own free will. So you're very intelligent, you're very literate, you're very interested in things that get you ahead in all the ways you've gotten yourself ahead. You didn't create that about yourself, right? And obviously there's a genetic component to that, there's an environmental component to that, there's just cosmic ray bombardment that can help or hurt. Who knows what influences are there, but none of that is something that you have authored. And that's true of everyone in the room. You have exactly the disposition you have, the effort you have. If you wake up tomorrow morning with twice the capacity for effort and grit that you had yesterday, you won't know where that came from. If it comes from a book you read, you can't determine the fact that the book had precisely the influence it had and not a little bit less or a little bit more. You are part of a system of influences. And so this is a picture, in my view, that just makes a mockery of the notion of free will. Right, it goes down to the smallest possible case of my getting to the end of the sentence. Right, it's just like if I have a stroke now, well then sorry I can't do it, but I didn't, and I didn't choose that either. So now that I think taking that on board does not rob us of morality. I think because we still have a preference between an excruciating plunge into civil war.
So before he gets to what he thinks the moral takeaway is, a couple things. First of all, since he started off finishing off the is-ought stuff before stumbling into free will, before we do the free will, should just talk about that for a second, right? That he uses this example about wealth inequality, and and of course we'd all recognize that that wealth inequality there's a certain level of it that's bad. And it's like this is a perfect example because look, what's incredibly controversial in moral philosophy is how and why and whether we should care about wealth inequality. Like, like libertarian philosophers make all these arguments that it doesn't matter how much inequality you end up with as long as the process you used to get there was just. There are people, like even. There are certainly like liberal philosophers who won't go that far, but I'll say, well, as long as we shouldn't really care about it as long as the floor is okay, right?
Exactly.
The welfare minimum is all right at the bottom. That it doesn't matter how big the gap is between the top and the bottom, and then and people who have the third position, which just for convenience we'll call the correct position, say that it does actually matter a lot, but those are all options that have been argued for extensively, and I suspect even that probably poor confused Eric Weinstein, to give him credit, credit is due, is probably to the left of the other two on those questions, so like and it's like what's the science that's going to tell us who's right about this?
It's amazing. I mean, it's amazing continually with him, and kind of with all these guys. Like they start to say something like, oh yeah, right, like so he starts to want to say like, these facts about how determined we are, and how you don't control where you're born, your standing in society and your talents and all of that, and these are relevant for certain conclusions we might draw about justice. And like, totally, I agree, they are relevant. Like Rawls makes big use of them to argue for his to argue against meritocracy and to argue for his conception of social justice. So these are relevant premises, but then he, like you say, he just glosses all over that. It's like, there are these facts, therefore this very specific view about economic justice and social justice that's like capitalism plus a good safety net or something just automatically somehow follows from that. Like I think you might need a few more premises that are not just factual premises to get to that conclusion.
Exactly. Right? Like, and then this gets to the point where like again, whether you think that the whether you think that the libertarian position that outcomes don't matter if the if the inputs are don't violate property rights, or the G.A. Cohen kind of position that we should be very concerned about the the outcomes both in terms, not just in terms of welfare, though certainly in terms of that, but also in terms of inequality, or points in between. Like the way that you argue with these is to about these, like the only way, if anybody's developed a second way of arguing about them, like I certainly haven't run into it, right? Like the only way I know of to argue about that is to start with some sort of appeal to moral intuition. Well, what about this? Can't we recognize that it would be unjust if this happened? Well, if so, then what's the theory that could explain that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you get all your cute Wilt Chamberlain examples and all that stuff, and you get going, talking about getting people to think carefully about what they actually care about and what they value and what follows from that. More facts isn't going to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Which again, is the thing that I think is the key, Hume insight here, which is that there are no the facts can be, once we decide what we care about, the facts can be very relevant in telling us how to go about acting in the world to try to bring that about, or or they can alert us to the the presence of some other issue that we also care about that might complicate our first reaction or whatever. All of that is certainly true, but like once you get down to the most basic questions about what we what we care about, like that, why we should care about the most basic things that we care about, then you're not, I mean, whatever, good luck, but I don't like, we can, and even somebody like, like Kant, who thinks that there is some ultimate sense in which it's, it's just irrational, not to, not to care about the things that he thinks we should, that not to have the moral system that he thinks we should, at least, has read as Hume and absorbed that and understand that there's no way to get that from empirical facts, that those are just not going to tell you the right information. He's got that nice example in the Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals, where he says, like a doctor who's, that the same medical knowledge that would tell you exactly how to save somebody could also tell you exactly how to poison them, without getting
that's right.
Science isn't going to tell you which one of those things you should.
That's right.
How you can do it, right? Which is like, or like when I was talking to Glenn Greenwald, he actually brought up a real world example of this when the semi-fascist president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro was stabbed. I think it was a year and a half ago, right? It's like, okay, the emergency room doctors have saved him or not, whatever you think the right answer.
That's right.
Neither medical science nor any other kind of science is going to tell you.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, so then after that, in the part that we just watched, he gives his basic argument against belief in free will, and starts to transition. I think he's going to get more into this, into what he thinks the moral upshot, of disbelieving in free will is. But as far as like the thing itself, he says, okay, well, I mean, basically, the short version of this argument would be determinism is true. I'm going to spend a couple of paragraphs sort of laying that out and really making you think about determinism is true. So no free will. So and he, at least in this, he has the virtue of defining what he means by free will, which is, he said, believing that there's a ghost in the machine.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, as is typically, as we kind of said at the beginning of this thing, there's not really an argument here. This is just kind of this framing that both he and Shapiro have in common, that free will has to mean this magic ghost in the machine thing. And then, and then he fills it in very, very verbose, very and very, nice sounding language. He explains in detail, like the way neuroscientists would, like, here's all these ways in which you're determined, in which all these influences can affect your behavior in ways you might not be aware of, and therefore no free will. But he's ignoring the third option, which is compatibilism, which says, well, actually, the kind of free will that matters is consistent with us being beings, like he describes, that are just influenced in all these ways that come about in the world. So yeah, he's right. Like, for some of us, we're very lucky. We were born in the first world. We were born to, in my case, middle-class parents, at least, or parents who had decent means. And that gave me the opportunity to develop all these capacities. But once you have these capacities, you do have a kind of freedom if you were lucky enough to develop them. You have the ability to reason, you have the ability to reflect, you have the ability to do all the kind of stuff we've been talking about, to look at different ranges of outcomes and say, okay, which of these is one that's actually consistent with my values, which of these is actually worth valuing, which of these is not worth valuing. We can exercise these capacities. And if we're lucky enough to have again, we don't have control over whether or not we're lucky enough to have those capacities, but if you're lucky enough to have them, you do have a kind of freedom that matters, and at least can be argued matters for things like moral responsibility and praise and blame and punishment and all that other stuff. And he just glosses over all that. He's just like, well, nope, obviously what everyone means by free will is this magic ghost in the machine thing, and obviously we don't have that, so therefore no free will. And it's also just worth mentioning, like, he keeps referring, like, this is the kind of free will that people think they have is this magic ghost in the machine thing. And he never gives any evidence for that claim. That, if anything's a fact, it's this empirical claim about what is the kind of free will that people believe that they have. And there's actually been a lot of empirical work done on this. A lot of social psychologists and then also these experimental philosophers have done a lot of clever studies looking at different very deterministic kinds of examples, and then asking people, do you think this person had free will, and are they responsible for what they did? And in at least in a lot of the studies, the evidence seems to suggest that actually people are kind of natural compatibilists. They still want to ascribe free will and responsibility to people, even when it's clear that everything they did was determined, or they're part of a deterministic universe.
Yeah, no, that's right. By the way, I should say, Forrest reminds me to tell people at the very end, if anybody puts any questions in super chats, he'll collect those up and read those at the end. But yeah, no, that's that. Yeah, so that's right. And I think, I think in some cases, just a couple of distinctions worth making, or underlining if they've already been made. That so I think that a lot of people, when they're thinking about philosophy, when they hear the phrase free will, what they hear is like freedom from deterministic chains of cause and effect.
That's right.
And of course, that's definitionally incompatible with deterministic chains of cause and effect.
Right.
And I think that's something that's worth recognizing, because I know that some people hear that and think, yeah, we can act on reasons, we can deliberate about what to do, but you're going to be determined to have the reasons that you have. You're going to be determined to deliberate. It's like, nobody's denying that, right? Like that's not the point in dispute here, right? The point of dispute is whether the kind of free will that you can have, even if everything's determined, or if the phrase free will throws you off, if the kind of control over your actions you can have, if everything's determined, is a kind that's significant, that lines up with some important things that people have meant by free will, that is linked to the sorts of concepts that people are usually interested in are thinking about usually when they're interested in free will, like the ones you just listed off at the end, praise and blame, all that stuff. That we don't think that something could be somebody's fault if they weren't in control of in control over it, and so the question is, can you have the sort of control over your actions that it would take for it to make sense to say that if you do something bad, you're morally at fault for having done it, that you're being, or if you do something really good, right? Can you say it's it's morally appropriate to praise somebody for that? Is any of that is all of that compatible with the idea that we have, that everything is physically determined? In other words, that if you start out with with physical time slice of the universe, they you just press pause, right? There's the way the entire physical world is at that moment, and where all the particles are and where they go, all that stuff. Then that you could just in principle, right? That we couldn't, maybe nothing that ever exists could, but in principle, it would be possible to extrapolate from all of that, exactly what's going to happen in the future, where all the particles are going to be in the future. I mean, what all the people are doing, which and the thing that people who have Sam Harris's position, will say, and this is the part of their position that I think is reasonable, is okay, look, even if that's not totally true, right? Like that description I just gave, that sort of maximal determinism. Maybe that's not totally true. If you know a little quantum physics, then that on some interpretations there are elements of physical laws that aren't totally deterministic. They're just kind of probabilistic. But it's not obvious why any of that would matter for the for the free will question. Like if it turns out there is that 0.01% quantum randomness, it's not totally that an omniscient being that knew everything about the physical world at this moment would be able to mathematically extrapolate what would happen in the future, because there, some of it's just some of it's like, some of it's a matter of, like rolling dice, that like, you don't know, which combination, is going to come up. That it doesn't really seem like that would be, the difference between those two descriptions would matter one way or the other. So
that's right.
Yeah. So that part of the position seems totally reasonable, but then the jump is from there to if any of those things are true, right? If anything like either of those things are true, right? If there's any sort of whether it's totally deterministic physical laws or whether there's a element of randomness and probability in it, but as long as there's basically some sort of law-like physical processes going on and not some crazy ghost in the machine view, then does that mean that we don't have free will in the sense of being in control of your actions in the right sort of way for those actions to be your fault? And then again, it's like the is-ought thing in that like
he's just slipping from that description to therefore obviously all this other stuff goes with it. This value stuff goes with it.
Exactly. That like you said, okay, so because in both cases, right, the is-ought stuff and in the determinism free will thing, what he's skipping past is what the entire philosophical debate is about, right? Like typically, typically philosophers, or most of them, don't sit around claiming that from their armchairs they can tell exactly which theory of physics is true. Like the argument is if determinism is true, does that mean that there's no morally significant sense in which we're in control of our actions? Yes or no?
Right. Exactly. So there's a lot there. Another thing, just it's just worth mentioning, like, because I do think a lot of people find this convincing at first, but if you think about it just a little bit, I think it becomes less convincing. So this move from like, well, everything I did is determined, especially when you talk about predictability, like in principle, some Laplace's demon or whatever could predict everything you're going to do if they knew the laws of physics, and so therefore you're not free. And that move from predictability to lack of freedom or lack of responsibility, just, I think if you think about it just for a second, it's not actually that plausible. I mean, there are all kinds of things that even without being Laplace's demon, I could predict about people that I know. Like I know you pretty well. I know one of the things I know about you is that you're a very good, loving, devoted husband. So like if Jen called you and said, I'm sick, I need you to come home right now, I know you would go straight home. I could predict that with like pretty much 100% certainty. Does that mean that you're not free because I can predict what you're going to do? Like, no, of course not. It just means I know the kinds of things that you care about, and given what you care about and the kind of person that you are, this is of course what you're going to do. This is what your character is going to determine that you do. And I think intuitively we still want to say that you deserve praise for that, or at least we would value that you're that kind of person. You're acting freely. So this inference from like the fact that we have a character that determines our actions to, freedom, like that, it needs a lot more argument. At least you can't just it's not that obvious.
If 99% predictability means means that doesn't have any influence on our beliefs about your control and responsibility for what we predict that you do. If somebody, I can predict based on my knowledge of Sam Harris that if it was brought up to him since the residents of the West Bank aren't citizens of any state and decision makers don't give a shit about them, that they know who have gotten the COVID vaccine yet, that he would not be he would not be appropriately moved by that fact. To reconsider his positions on Israel-Palestine, that we wouldn't infer from that it's not his fault, that he has that position. So the question is, does the move from 99% to 100%, does that mean, right, that that's suddenly relevant? And maybe it is, But I think the 99% thing is a useful way of showing that it's not just obvious, that it is. You have to think about it a little bit, because say, well, okay, what are the reasons? What's the kind of control that seems relevant here, right? Like, is it? I mean, is it really that we only think that that Sam Harris is morally culpable for his awful position he promulgates about the Middle East because we still we implicitly believe in some sort of weird ghost in the machine metaphysics about him, or is it that we think that he is coming to these things without that he's coming to these things on the basis the thing is the kind of control over his actions that we think is relevant to moral responsibility, free will in the ghost of the machine sense, or is it free will in the sense of we think that he is the kind of being who is capable of understanding reasons for and against different courses of action and deliberating on the basis of that understanding. Is that the kind of control that we that we think is relevant? And there is a whole I mean, you can you could read Ryan's dissertation and get a good overview, but I mean, like, there's a whole like vast literature that you could read about that, and there's certainly certainly debate about that, and there's certainly there's certainly room for for people who have engaged with all this literature to come to the same kind of conclusion that Sam Harris is coming here, like Dirk Pereboom, is somebody who more or less thinks many of the things that Sam Harris thinks about free will. But I mean, I could respect that a lot more because he's thought about it, and he doesn't just
I mean, Pereboom,
true, because he's not aware of what the arguments are against it.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of the philosophers I respect the most are people I disagree with on this topic, like Pereboom, Bruce Waller, Greg Caruso, a lot of these people, and they take the time to engage carefully and develop careful, thoughtful arguments for their specific conclusions, and that's fine. I mean, it's much like Sam Harris on morality. Like, there are a lot of people I really respect who are utilitarians, Peter Singer or someone like that. But like, Singer takes the time to carefully argue for his ethics and his meta ethics. He doesn't just say, well, here are these descriptive facts about human psychology, therefore utilitarianism, right? He actually does the work to get to his conclusions. Another small thing I just wanted to say is when you're talking about the different ways of defining free will, something I've been kind of thinking lately is it almost might be better just to get rid of the term free will. Like, I always think about like Slaughterhouse-Five, like Vonnegut, like what's the aliens, the Tralfamadorians or whatever those creatures are, and they're like, only on Earth have we seen this talk of free will. Like, this is just this weird idiosyncrasy of Earthlings, and you can imagine that being the case. And actually, to go back to Shapiro, like, it almost maybe seems to be motivated by Judeo-Christian particular history that we got so obsessed with this term free will in the West. We just do away with all that, forget free will, just focus on the kind of control that we have, and is it enough for moral responsibility? That's the interesting question.
So and I think that there's a sense, like, again, I think free will sometimes people mean again, I think often, and actually I think this maybe is some of what's going on in those studies that you mentioned, because I think sometimes when asked the do people have free will in this situation question, they'll say no, right? But then when it gets the moral responsibility question, they'll flip back to yes. And I suspect that some of what's going on there is that we're like the framing of it, right? Like, when you start saying a bunch of stuff about determinism and then you ask, do we have free will? What that sort of prompts people to do is to think that the kind of free will we're thinking about here is freedom from deterministic causation, and or at least or at least some kind of free will that deterministic causation is going to be very relevant to. That you need some sort of in principle unpredictability or something as part of it. Whereas when you ask the moral responsibility questions, especially if the thing that you're asking about moral responsibility for is really like morally significant, right? Like
Exactly. Yeah.
you know, it's you know, murder or something like that, right? Then
Yeah.
then you switch the context, and so the prompted is different, right? You know, because like that makes it a little clearer that like, no, what we're talking about is, do you satisfy whatever sort of condition there is that you have to be in control of your action in order for you to be at fault for them? And it's not, I don't think it's just our moral horror at murder or whatever, because we do normally think, you know, I think intuitively that that there are people who do things like that, you know, who aren't at fault, you know, that you know, that if, you know, very small children, people with certain kinds of mental illnesses, you know,
That's right.
like every legal system I've ever heard of has some sort of, you know, has some sort of category of, you know, not guilty by, you know, by reason of insanity in it, you know, like, you know, so like it seems like we do normally make a distinction, you know, that between thinking that somebody did something that's morally horrifying and thinking that somebody is at fault for doing something that's morally horrifying.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, there are, I mean, you can argue, I mean, there are people who go here, right, that, you know, that there isn't really, despite initial appearances, that you don't really need to be in control, you know, that there is, you know, that second category isn't about control at all, but like, you know, it seems, you know, at least it seems plausible at first glance that, you know, that second category does have something to do with free will. So with control. So
with control,
free will means, you know, free will means they, you know, freedom to do otherwise. Then, you know, then okay, you know, like, you know, maybe there are. You know, there are, of course, ways that lots of people have tried to explain that concept in a compatibilist way. Other people find that very unconvincing and sort of think that's like, oh, that's just all playing with words. But if free will means what we mean when we say, oh, you know, the defendant committed that murder of his own free will, you know, then that, again, I think that the connection between determinism, right? You know, you're not responsible for, you know, you don't get to decide, you know, where you're born. You don't get to decide all the, you know, this, that, and the other thing. Therefore, there's no sense in which you're responsible for your actions at the end. And, or therefore you're not in, you know, you don't satisfy the control condition for being responsible for your actions is at least a hell of a lot less obvious.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That just needs a lot more argument.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's go.
And needless misery. And
Interested? All right. Well, we
is this like a commercial break or?
Seems like a cutoff pretty abruptly there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is good. I'm glad this is happening tonight. When we do the actual episode tomorrow, we'll have figured all this all out. So.
Oh boy.
Interested. Yeah, I might refresh the page. I don't know. So,
I mean, that's coming. We're going to have to ask that question.
So then we can be God, but God can't make us those kind of robots? Is the argument?
Well, no, but
should we maybe try taking?
I think we missed something.
Yeah, I think we're about a minute ahead of where we were.
My hands now, but I to this, and Eric, I'd be interested to know if you agree with this. It seems to me that once you admit you either won the lottery or you didn't on some level, that conveys a kind of ethical commitment or an ethical obligation that you wouldn't otherwise have. You can't be the person who then says everyone just is basically you're on your own. You either make it based on your effort or not. I mean, this goes to questions of, you know, should we have universal health care? It's not just an economic
Again,
answer.
you're going directly from is to ought with no stop on the train at all.
Well, no,
it's just for literally.
I hate to say Shapiro has a point, but Shapiro has a point.
Very wealthy and very sophisticated countries that took the premises that you are building upon and built some of the most repressive regimes in history.
Well,
right?
but they had other things going on. They had bad ideas of economics.
I agree.
They had personality cults.
I agree with all of that.
Right.
But the point that I'm making is that you are making definitive statements about value judgment with reference to a naturally selected interaction of biology and environment. I just don't know how you're getting from one to the other.
Owning the truth of biology.
I mean, do robots have morality? Is what I'm asking you.
Well, they certainly would if we built them to have conscious states that could allow for suffering and well-being. I mean, that's coming. We're going to have to ask that question.
So then we can be God, but God can't make us those kind of robots? Is the argument?
Well, no, but
should we maybe try taking the fun out of this?
I thought I was trying.
So
definitely missed something there.
one possibility is that there's like a layer cake, and at the bottom you've got quantum field theory, and then you get organic chemistry, and you build this thing up, and you've got natural and sexual selection, and then you get systems of morality riding on top of this, and there's some sort of weird category error between the layers of this cake. So it may be that if you can get rid of quantum indeterminacy, that you have effectively Laplacian determinism, and everything is a product of initial conditions, and that takes place at the lowest level. But there's no morality at the level of exciting fields and electrons and quarks. So you don't pair that observable, which is like that quark is being unethical right now, with some behavior which affected whether some synapse fired. So that morality thing has to do with this very high up layer, which is some sort of social organization, which is not fundamental. And so what I hear us doing is talking about free will down here, talking about morality up here. And one of the lessons of physics is that every layer of the cake has
its own language game associated with it. And
yes, we call those observables, right? Yeah. So those observables are paired with what we might call effective theories, right? And so these effective theories are not to be mixed up. And so every time we get into one of these free will conversations, I don't know whether you're talking about we have as if free will. Who was forced to buy a ticket to tonight's event?
Well, no, but to answer that question, really, so did you actually?
I didn't have to buy one.
Yeah, well, I don't know. The night is young.
You guys should totally get in on this. But the point is that I'm perfectly happy with the idea that I have as if free will at the top of the layer cake, and if we can get rid of quantum observation and get back to Laplacian determinism at some higher level, that I have no free will.
But it's as if free will only because you actually are not aware of the proximate cause of your action in each moment.
I mean, if I look at a chaotic pendulum over at the Exploratorium, it may have a very clear path that's determined through Newtonian mechanics, but I'm not smart enough to figure it out. So effectively, I'm super surprised. I just sit there like an idiot, twirling it, thinking, "Oh wow, I didn't think it was going to do that." Even though I know the physics, right? So the point is that if I try to compute something that's much larger than I am, my computer can't handle that much.
Yeah. So the last thing he's doing, what you kept pointing out. Earlier, which is just like making this like really. I mean, this is one of these things that's so frustrating because he should be pushing back on Harris for is this why is saying determinism, therefore no free will, and ignoring the entire philosophical debate about whether free will is compatible with determinism, and then saying that this has something or other to do with whether we should have universal health care, without without like pausing to really like try to make the connection or what you actually have to believe to get there. But he's not doing any of that, right? Instead, he's making this ridiculous inference from he's just jumbling up the epistemic question, which is, do I know what the chain of causation is?
Yes.
the substantive, with the metaphysical question, which is it actually determined? Is there some sense which has free will?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a shame because for a second I thought he was going to do something really interesting. I think he's trying to do it. It seems to me like he's probably read some Dennett, or maybe more like Christian List more recently does this kind of thing. And Hillary Bach, who I love, also does something kind of similar. So like with his cake metaphor, the layers of cake thing, I think what he was trying to do is he was talking about like Dennett does, like different levels of description. And Harris even tried to help him out. He's like, well, yeah, you mean at these different levels of description, there are these different language games and there's different concepts, and that we can make category mistakes if we try to apply concepts from one level of description to a different level of description. I thought that's where he was going to try to go, but then he just turned it into this stupid. So like, therefore, because I'm too dumb to know the causes, I can just talk like I have free will. That's not really the point of that that version of compatibilism, which I am actually sympathetic to. But yeah, he just made it to a much weaker and more ridiculous position than it is.
Yeah, right. So I think the one way to maybe get at the the better version of the position, which I've was thinking about this morning, because I've been or something in the neighborhood of it, because I'm researching for this book about Christopher Hitchens. So I just read this this book of essays back and forth between Hitchens and this guy who's this Christian writer, Douglas Wilson, and Wilson really pushes this line in that about like, but according to you, there really is no, and then he mentions all these abstract concepts. There's only particles bumping around and chemicals and whatever, and so I think this kind of the better version of this layer cake response, right?
Yeah.
Say, well, okay. But we're like, this is, to make the, to make the conversation even nerdier, right? This is the fallacy of asserting a disjunct, saying that, at least one of these two things is true. The first one's true, so the second one isn't.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So, like, is this, like, okay. This iPhone is composed of is composed of molecules and ultimately particles, and we could give a chemical analysis of all that stuff, but that doesn't mean that the iPhone itself doesn't exist.
Right, exactly. And if you want to describe what the iPhone is actually doing, like why don't I have a good connection? Why can't I make a phone call right now? Then I want to analyze it at the software level, not at the quantum mechanics level, right? And there are certain concepts that are going to be relevant in one conceptual scheme and not another. Yeah, so I think that's that's kind of where he was trying to go with that, and but he just really garbled it.
Got off track. But it's also worth thinking about that initial. The initial thing, before Weinstein tried and failed even after Harris tried to help him out, to make that argument about the layer cake, that before that, Ben Shapiro had his little moment of lucidity, and then he got way off track again, by saying that believing that people should have health care is why we had Stalinism. But
he started out well. Like you can't just go from no free will to universal health care. That was a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was like, and so I think that why he had somebody in the chat say they just saw a cattail behind you. That'd be Deku.
Oh, yes, that is Deku. Yeah.
But that's like that. I think where Harris is going, like the way that inference was supposed to work, is that okay, if there are all these things outside of our control, and therefore it's ridiculous to think that that everybody who gets ahead or doesn't get ahead in life is has a gets a full-time job with good and good employer health insurance, or doesn't. That it's unreasonable to think that all those things are under our control. Therefore, one specific reason that somebody might give for thinking that we shouldn't have universal health care doesn't, isn't a good argument, right? Which all of that's totally right. It's just that it has nothing to do with the larger point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's like, if somebody is going to be like some weird, like hyper meritocrat and say that if you aren't, I don't know, if you're not smart enough or talented enough or hardworking enough to to get a middle class job with decent employer health insurance, then you just don't deserve health care. Okay, well, I mean, if Harris's point is that that's a bad argument, I certainly agree. But like saying that that's a bad argument is consistent with literally any possible position on free will.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't. Yeah. Anyway, you can't just go from no free will to therefore this very specific view he has about universal health care and economic justice and whatever else.
Yeah, no, exactly, right. So, and in fact, if you are going to talk about like the moral upshot, which should be a, I mean, look, it should be a separate discussion, right? Like, that they're both interesting questions, but they are very different questions, right? Which are, can we make sense of some sort of idea of free will that would be consistent with physical determinism, yes or no? And if the answer is no, is that a morally worrying result or something like that?
And again, like as we mentioned before, like the other people who argue for the same conclusion that Harris has argued for are always very careful about that. I mean, like Parabon, Waller, like Caruso, like they all tend to be very optimistic. Of course, they all tend to think that it would overall be a good thing if we got rid of free will and more responsibility. But they're careful to argue, like, even if we were wrong about that, my argument for the abolition of free will would still stand. Like it might, even if it turned out to be bad news, that wouldn't change the quality of the argument.
Yeah.
Whereas Harris is just running those two things together completely.
Exactly. So the can we make sense of free will in a deterministic universe, should be discussed separately from is it bad news if we can't, or good news if we can't. But if we are going to talk about that second question, like, okay, I guess it's good news that we have that we have a response to that particular, extremely weird meritocratic argument against universal health care. That that people who don't win the professional managerial class rat race, don't deserve to, be treated like get sick. But also, like, we don't really. I mean, that's like saying, it's like that. Yeah, I mean, if we have a, if we have this atom bomb that we can drop on the city, that means that we can kill this particular mosquito, but like you can do that without dropping the bomb. Like you can defeat this argument without just denying that free will exists. And there are and there are other consequences there, not all of which are as congenial to politically progressive conclusions. So one interesting one that John Romer mentions in his book, A Future for Socialism, and I'm not even totally sure if I buy this argument or not, but it's an interesting thought. Anyway, is that the intuitively we want to make a distinction between whether somebody could achieve something because of factors outside of their control or not. And we actually think that that's important for egalitarian reasons. That if some people can't, that if some people, can't like become have certain career paths, because they they were born in bad economic circumstances and can't like didn't have a good way to get the money together to go to college, whatever.
Yeah.
We think that that's troubling in a way that it's not troubling if you just don't happen to get one of those jobs. It's like I don't know. There was like there's some sort of like there were just other candidates who were more qualified. And to make that distinction run, you need to have some concept of some things being in your control and other things not being in your control.
That's right. Yeah.
And we can argue about whether that's exactly the same sense of control that's relevant to moral responsibility or not. Maybe it's not, but like it's
sounds like it's gonna be pretty close to it though. Right?
Yeah, it seems like it might be, right? Like the same sense, of control that's relevant to to both of those things that we don't. And so that seems like a big thing, motivating like certain kinds of egalitarianism, even when we don't think that everybody can necessarily have the same, life outcomes, that that not, like not everybody who wants a certain, even in like a really advanced, like the kind of, society that Aaron Bastani is talking about, in the like 23rd century or whatever, the, fully automated luxury communism, even in that society, there are probably lots of things that it would just be logistically impossible for everybody to do, that only some people could do them, but we still have a justice concern if the reasons that some people are able to do them and not others have to do with certain kinds of things that are outside of their control. So we think it's unjust to assign them to some people rather than another, like, race or, economic background or whatever. And so if there just is no relevant distinction, between, if there just is no difference, which we can be in control of anything, deterministic universe, then that actually seems to be bad news for making sense of egalitarian political impulses.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's a plausible argument.
Yeah. And yeah, I think also, and then also, another one that I think is relevant, I mean, it's a little bit, it's a little bit less obvious, but if you think about punishment, then it's not, so people, like the kind of line that Harris takes, and the kind of line that people who, are unfathomably more thoughtful than Harris, but agree with it, also take, is that it's still that we can have, that it's not that, like, if you capture, if a community of people who all don't believe in free will has captured an axe murderer, that they just have to let him go because he's not responsible for his crimes. You can still make sense of the idea of some sort of legal, what we would normally think of as legal punishment, for purely utilitarian reasons. That that it's like people a very 2021 appropriate analogy that Parabum uses is that it's like quarantining plague victims. It's not.
That's right. Yeah. Parabum and Caruso, but Caruso has really done a lot of work to develop. I guess he's still working on that kind of quarantine model of justice. That
you have to keep people in both the quarantine case and the axe murderer case. So you have to keep people isolated from others, not because they deserve to be isolated as a punishment, but as a public safety measure. And then think, okay, well that sounds good, and I think there's a certain way of thinking about that does make it sound congenial to left-wing political conclusions, because you say, okay, well, if we're working on a quarantine model, then not a punishment model, then you have then it would be that sounds good, right? Because that means that we shouldn't that we shouldn't try to make prison like as harsh as we can for the sort of punitive reasons that like people always say. It's like, oh, it's supposed to be a punishment, it's you should be very focused on rehabilitation whenever that's possible and all that. And of course, those are all the things that I want for the criminal justice system.
Absolutely.
So if that's all you're thinking about, then that sounds great. But then on the other hand, like, what about like one thing that does seem like it also seems plausible that that there are certain kinds of criminal punishments that that we think we like. There our only concern is not public safety, right? That's certainly like, you know, like we're also very morally concerned, and should be, about the injustice of punishing people who didn't actually do whatever they're being accused of.
That's right.
And that gets a lot dicier, because if you're just if you're just doing if the reason it's okay to lock people up, the only reason, right, the whole explanation is just that there are good consequences. It doesn't take that much imagination to come up with the circumstance in which, you know, punishing an innocent person will have good consequences.
That's right. Yeah, and usually, I mean, Harris and even more thoughtful people will usually try to respond to that with all these arguments that, like, well, it would never actually be good to do this, but that's very contingent, you know, you're really missing the point. If your only reason for not punishing innocent people is that the outcome isn't good, you've really lost out on a lot of our basic moral intuitions. Like, even whatever the intuition is, like, whatever the consequences were, even if they were good just for some random flukish reason, it would be unjust to punish an innocent person because they don't deserve it, and that's what gets lost. Like you're saying, that gets lost once you go for free will skepticism. I just want to mention, I do think, actually, well, this is another huge topic. This could be a whole other conversation, but I do think I'm actually really sympathetic to the idea of doing away with retributive punishment, especially making people suffer for the sake of desert. Like, just you deserve to suffer, therefore we're going to make you suffer. I think there are reasons to be skeptical of that whole concept that are quite independent of the free will debate. But I still think you need the notion of moral responsibility in the justice system. One, for the reason that you just said, but also because there are some other models of justice that are not retributive, like restorative justice models, which focus on rehabilitation and preventing danger, but also on trying to work out ways that an offender can repay or restore the state of the person or the people they harmed. And there's a lot of interesting work with this model of justice. It produces really good outcomes, but also it's really good for rehabilitation, and it also just seems to really get at justice in a more fundamental way than the retributive model does. But you need more responsibility that's an essential part of that model of justice. So I think you can take everything Sam Harris and the others say that's reasonable about why we don't want a retributive system of justice without taking on their views about free will.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's definitely right. So I mean, there are clearly so you could do the fanciful, sort of thought experiments, where there's some way to, there's some circumstance in which there's about to be a riot, if somebody is caught who did something, and then you frame someone, whatever, and then you could say, oh, that would never happen. But I mean, I guess a couple of relevant points. One, lots of people actually in the real world do claim that there are utilitarian trade-offs that happen. I mean, I'm often very skeptical of those claims, but when people when people will justify the drone assassinations that kill 20 people who aren't intended targets for every intended target, and then it's much harder to know how many of the intended targets are actually terrorists. Then I think that I do again think there are good reasons to be skeptical about the claims that actually does save more lives than it takes or whatever. But also okay, if it did, would that really make it okay? Is that enough to justify it?
I think I think most of the reason most of us react with horror to that is not that we think they got calculated the consequences wrong. It's
yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, right, totally right. It's like those intro to philosophy kinds of example. Well, actually, from Judith Jarvis Thompson, about the taking the surgeon, killing the one person so they can transplant their organs to 5 people. It's like the if you're, even if you think that, for a variety of reasons, it wouldn't happen or it wouldn't be worth it anyway in a consequentialist way because word would spread and people wouldn't go to the hospital anymore.
Yeah.
It really does seem disturbing if that's your only reason.
Yeah.
For thinking that that's bad.
Yeah. Like, I would do it, but on careful reflection, this seems maybe risky, so let's not do it. But you seem to have really missed the reason why it's wrong. It's not because you think we calculated the consequences in the wrong way.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's finish this up.
All right.
System. So, this is why sort of self-reflection leads to madness very often. And
I thought you said this was going to be fun.
Hopefully it's not that often.
I'm still really interested in the app that you're coming out with for meditation.
Don't hold your breath, but it is coming.
Okay. But what I'm trying to get at is that the fun part of these conversations comes from making these category errors. And the unfun part comes from sorting it out. And then, when I played Johnny Raincloud, everybody will say, well, okay, I guess that makes sense, but it's no fun anymore. And so that's what I'm worried about.
Mm-hmm. Well, but you're not disparaging the idea of a unity of knowledge, right? You're not, at each layer of the cake, you can make a smooth transition between layers that doesn't usurp your understanding of each layer.
I mean, I have a fair idea when my wife's going to be angry at me for not doing the dishes, but I can't recover it from quantum field theory, right? Well, so the idea is that maybe that the quantum field theory determines her behavior.
No, but there's nothing about doing dishes that violates quantum field theory. One presumes. I mean, so it's not.
All right, actually, I have to give a
worldview in order to talk about human relations.
I think here, I think he tried and failed to make this argument earlier, and it seemed like he was actually kind of making it for real now.
He's doing better now.
And this time, Harris just completely missed the point. It's not. The point of the layer cake thing isn't to say that that the stuff that's happening on the higher up layers somehow is like inconsistent, with anything happening lower. It's just the opposite. It's to say that sure, there's some ultimate sense in which a omniscient being could redescribe doing the dishes with quantum field theory, but that doesn't mean that doing the dishes isn't like a real thing that actually happens. It doesn't mean like the most useful way to talk about doing the dishes is going to be by invoking quantum field theory.
Yeah.
Like, all of that stuff is super. I know we've got like 2 minutes left, and I said we were just going to watch the last part before we comment about it. But that's like that was just too much of a fail by Harris. I couldn't let that go.
Yeah.
The moral layer, the free will layer, or not.
I can do my best, but I don't find it useful to try to think about human psychology from the point of view of
quarks.
Of quarks. But could organic chemistry, if some neurotransmitter is depleted, so there are some ways in which these different layers can talk to each other, but there's no reason that I should be able to compute necessarily across these layers successfully, even if there is some sort of concept of entailment or determination.
What I'm interested in is kind of a first principle methodology of moving forward into the unknown, right? So what I object to in religion and in this notion of revelation is that there was some prior century where we were given the best ideas we're ever going to have on a specific topic, and we must cling to those ideas until the end of time. This is the analogy or the rubric that I find most convincing. It's like there's only ever been people talking about reality here, right? And therefore you can either locate yourself in a current, modern, open-ended conversation, or you can anchor yourself to an ancient one and never give yourself the freedom to rethink it.
So,
and you could have done it with Homer, you could have done it with Aristotle, you could have done it with Shakespeare, and the Hindus have done it with the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and you're losing no sleep over whether or not you should do likewise, right? And so my sense is that we need to, every question of societal importance requires that we now outgrow the accidents of merely contingent history, outgrow the fact that people used to be living in geographical isolation from one another and linguistic isolation from one another for centuries, and outgrow, therefore, our religious provincialism and just get to a common humanity that's using the best tools available to solve the hardest problems.
You're muted, Ben.
I don't. Yeah, I was just gonna say, we can stop it there. I don't need to hear Sam Harris, wrapping up the thing after he finishes the playing the video. It's not important.
No.
Yeah. So I do want to want to stick with this a little bit, because they sort of got lost. They sort of got lost in the the layer cake thing, which was good as far as it goes. The same way that Eric Weinstein had that very brief, moment of lucidity about moral intuitions earlier that was good as far as it went on the the is ought thing. But then I would yes, I strongly agree with that, Nathan. But
that's true. Very true.
I did want to do two things. If you've got a few more minutes. So one, the first thing was to because this particular debate was I think it was the entertaining train wreck that we thought it was going to be when we picked it. That that it's Harris having his half-baked arguments and Shapiro and Weinstein sort of being garbled in response to it. But I think it is actually useful if you watch just a quick video. Let me see. Of there's a point here where all right, so actually I can't find the video right offhand. I'm gonna try one more thing, and then I'm gonna officially give up on this. But I think that it's but anyway, whatever. I can remember what he says in it. Where Sam Harris is expanding on his reasons, for thinking that there isn't free will. And he does, like, it's like the only one I can find really where he does anything except for just find new ways of repeating that that there's a deterministic cause and effect, and saying, well, no ghost in the machine, therefore therefore no free will. And I think it's a particularly instructive one for figuring out like what he means by free will. And then whether what he means by it is the thing that's the most like oh, here we go. Nope, I found it. So figuring out what Harris means by free will and figuring out whether the thing that he means is the thing that's necessarily the most relevant to what we really mean, like when we talk about free will in context of moral responsibility and things like that. And I think it's something that, like, I think it's like a pretty accessible, it's a pretty accessible example, which is why I like it. So here's one last hit. I promise it's the last one I'm going to inflict on anybody tonight, but one last hit of Sam Harris.
So as a result of this work, it's actually scientifically uncontroversial to say that some moments before you are aware of what you are going to do in making a simple voluntary action, at a time at which you appear to be subjectively free to do whatever you want, your brain has already determined what it is you will do. And then you become gradually aware of this decision while you still think you're in the process of making it. Now, needless to say, this is very difficult to reconcile with a conventional notion of free will, because this timing discrepancy demonstrates that it would be possible for someone to know what you're going to do before you do, and while you still think you're free to make up your mind. But the truth is, I think actually too much has been made of this research. The truth is, even if there were no time lag, even if a conscious intention were truly simultaneous with its neurophysiological underpinnings, there would still be no room for free will, because you still wouldn't know why it is you do what you do. And again, this is a fact you can notice about yourself directly. Let's run a little experiment. Think of a city, anywhere in the world. You can choose any city you want. And now, of course, I could have primed you. I could have artfully placed cues in my speech in the last few minutes that would make you more likely to think of Las Vegas, for instance. So just to be on the safe side, don't pick Vegas. But pick a city, any city, and just pay attention to what this conscious process is like. Now, the first thing to notice about this is as free a decision as you are ever going to make in your life. Okay, you have all the cities in the world to choose from, and I'm just asking you to pick one. Now, several cities have probably occurred to you, and just focus on one. So everybody got a city? All right, well, I'm sorry to say that you all picked the wrong city. Don't ask me how I know this, but I do. So I just want you to do this again, just so you can see what the process is like. Pick another city, can't be the first, and notice what that experience is like. Okay, did you see any evidence for free will? Now, we better be able to find it here. I mean, if it's not here, it's not anywhere. So let's look for it. First, let's set aside all those cities whose names you don't know and therefore could not have picked. Okay, because you couldn't have picked one of those if your life depended on it. There's no freedom in that, obviously. Okay, and then there are many other cities whose names are quite well known to you, but which simply didn't occur to you to pick. For instance, perhaps Cairo didn't occur to you. You absolutely know that Cairo is a city, but for whatever reason, your Cairo circuits were not engaged. Okay, as a matter of neurophysiology, Cairo was not in the cards. So I want you to think about this. Were you free to choose that which did not occur to you to choose? Based on this, on the state of your brain a few moments ago, Cairo was not coming. Okay, where is the freedom in that? Of course, if you did think of Cairo, you should consider yourself a genius. Now, so you probably thought of several cities, and then let's say you thought of Paris and New York and Tokyo. And then you thought, I love Paris. I'm gonna go with Paris. And the last minute you thought, no, Tokyo, I'll go with Tokyo. And now this is the sort of decision that motivates the idea of free will. This is, you've got two or more choices, and you're picking between them, and it's just you and your thoughts. There's no coercion from the external world. You are doing it, apparently. But when you look closely, I think you'll find that you are in no position to know why you picked what you picked.
All right, so that's enough to get the idea across.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, it's hard to even know. I mean, well, first of all, those Libet type studies, but I'm glad he doesn't stick with it. But I mean, those studies have been largely discredited. Like I think even Harris more recently acknowledged that he regrets that he used to hang so much on those examples. But I guess here he's walking away from it. But yeah, I mean, like that just intuitive just seems so wrong. Like he says this is precisely the sort of decision that motivates the idea of free will. Like I think this is exactly the sort of decision that does not motivate the idea of free will.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the kind of decision where we don't care, where there are no consequences, there are no stakes. We don't care what city we come up with, and so that's exactly why we don't care. We have nothing invested in it. Like the kind of decision that motivates free will is when you're choosing between morally significant options. So like if the question were like, I don't know, there's an invading army and you have to flee to another city, what city are you going to go to? That's the kind of decision that motivates free will, because then I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to do my research. I'm going to try and figure out like which city can I get to most easily, which city is the safest, where do I have relatives, whatever. I'm going to look at all the factors and try to, on the basis of reasons, come up with a good decision. It's when we're applying reasons to try and produce a good outcome, that's when these concepts of freedom and responsibility are relevant. And it's interesting, like his example, and like also when you look at the Labette type studies, it's always something inconsequential, like when are you going to push a button, or like which city are you going to think of? Like those are precisely the kind of decisions where that just have no moral importance. And so
yeah, and I don't know that anybody actually does intuitively believe that they're in control of which city pops into their head when they're asked to name a city, or any examples like this. And I think that there is some, like, I remember when I was watching this the first time, what I thought of is Jean-Paul Sartre has this famous essay, Existentialism is a Humanism, where he is talking.
Probably the only Sartre I've really read.
That's so it's a widely read essay. I mean, look, I think Sartre on his bad days can get a little bullshitty in the way that late 20th century French philosophy sometimes does, but on his good days, it's he has insightful things to say, and this essay definitely represents one of the good days, and in there, and I like it because this is an example that nobody thought of as part of any of these sorts of like analytic philosophy debates about free will and determinism. That wasn't all the subject under consideration. He is interested in talking about this sort of felt experience of freedom, of this sort of like agonizing knowledge that it's up to you what you're going to do and worrying that you're going to make the wrong choice. And his example is a student. This is during World War II. I think Sartre had been held at like a German prisoner of war camp for a while, and then he was let out and went back to Paris and resumed teaching. And one of his students came to him with this dilemma about whether to, he had a elderly and sick mother, or elderly at least, that he had to take care of. But he also had a brother who'd been killed by the Nazis, during the initial invasion. And so he felt like he had an obligation to, patriotically, do his part to avenge his brother and drive the Nazis out of France, so he felt like he should go off and join the resistance, fighting the Free French Army or whatever. But he also worried about the consequences of abandoning his mother. And he was incredibly torn between these two things. And of course, Sartre gave him the most, fantastically unhelpful, advice ever, which is basically just like, well, you just have to decide this for, whatever. Doesn't, like it's not, I don't think he was good at, I don't think he was good at helping people with these things, but like that seems like what Sartre is describing as the experience of free will, the experience of this sort of like being weighted down by a sense that, what happens is up to you, that's under your control, that it's going to be your fault if you choose the wrong thing. Is really like like an opposite pole from like, what's going to pop into your head in like some stream of consciousness exercise. Because presumably the whole reason it's a hard dilemma is because he thinks that there are really good reasons to stay with his mother. He thinks there are really good reasons to go out and fight the Nazis. And that suggests, that like what we're really thinking of when we think of free will isn't, like what's just, like what, what some examples like what city name rises to the top of your consciousness, when you're asked to do this incredibly weird exercise.
When do I get the impulse to push this button? Like,
experiments, right? Totally, right. Like it's like this sort of thing that we're like thinking of in these canonical examples of free will are, having like deliberating about reasons for and against different courses of action, and that seems like that seems like something where it is much more plausible that there is that there is some sort of mechanism that we have cognitively that there is a significant, like, that does, it seems like if you understand the reasons, you're weighing the reasons and all of that stuff, that's at least not, again, there's a really complicated debate to be had about whether this is actually the kind of control that grounds moral responsibility, but like this is like at least the kind of thing that that sounds a lot less crazy to say that there's some significant sense in which it's under your control than to say that you get to control whether you think Paris or Las Vegas.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this weird kind of, I think it was John Martin Fisher had the phrase describing like Harris wants us to be like this sort of like absolute authors of ourselves. He seems to think that that's what free will would require, like that, to the point that I can be in somehow control of which thoughts pop into my head at which moments. And he calls that like metaphysical megalomania. Like, no, I don't think anyone actually, when they think about free will, that's not what they have in mind. What the Sartre example is great. Like what they have in mind is not what pops into your head in an instant, but over time with complex deliberations where you have good reasons for two different things, being the kind of agent who can understand those reasons and deliberate about them and then make a choice about what is best. That's the paradigmatic idea of free will that we think that we have. And like you say, that is, at least plausibly can be argued, we can exercise that kind of control whether we're deterministic or not. You can't dismiss it as easily as Sam Harris does once you focus on that kind of example.
Totally. I think that's exactly right, and a good place to wrap up that part of the discussion. Before we bring in Forrest and answer questions, I do want to get do want to wrap this up soon, but I've been thinking about this, and I feel like it's a little bit unfair because this thing that we watched, we covered most of the key members of the so-called intellectual dark web. There was your Ben Shapiro, your Sam Harris, your Weinsteins. But we left out an important one, and that feels unjust. So so this is just a quick video of I believe not officially authorized, but essentially a promotional summary for Jordan Peterson's new book, 12 More Rules.
Oh dear God, I'm gonna grab a drink while you play this. I can hear it, but.
Yeah. So I don't want to start this while Ryan is getting his drink, actually, because I think that the visuals in here can really help you to understand all the nuances of Dr. Peterson's thought. Nathan Drake says should do the Zizek Peterson debate sometime.
Oh God, that would be a slog.
Maybe we break it up into a couple of weeks. But we would do it. But in any case, so here's a little. Have you heard this story, Ryan, that's been referred to here?
Oh, the all beef diet thing.
Well, yeah. So the all beef diet thing is the background. Yeah. Jordan Peterson and his daughter doing the all beef diet, but then there's a Russell Sabriglia, who is he's an American academic, but he does like the bookings when Zizek is in the United States, and he last year I had was in Brooklyn, and I had dinner. Me and Michael Brooks had dinner with him, and he told us the story about the like while he was driving Zizek from the airport in Toronto, they were gonna like meet with the Peterson family to have dinner before the event, and so he's giving them all this background about the various people in the family, and so he told them all the weird, slightly creepy Twitter interactions between Jordan and Michaela Peterson about their all beef diet, and then like we got there, he's introducing Zizek around, and Zizek meets Michaela. And he says, I think not intending anything bad, but just Zizek being Zizek, what pops out of his mouth is, yes, the beef girl. And, that went down for about as well as we'd expect it to.
Yeah. That's great.
All right. So, informal, non-authorized promotional video for Jordan Peterson's new book, which is a real thing that's coming out this spring, 12 More Rules for Life.
I'm afraid your father will have to remain in his coma for several more months. We'll be feeding him pure meat through a tube just like you asked. In the meantime, let's go party all over Europe.
When people think of happiness or pursuing happiness, the first thing they think of is, well, it's a pretty selfish desire. I want to be happy for me. I mean, after all, who wants to be unhappy? But I'm here to tell you that, in fact, happiness is far, far, far more than a selfish desire. It's actually a moral obligation. Whether or not you're happy, and certainly whether or not you act happy, is a very, very altruistic endeavor. Yes, indeed, we have a moral obligation. Happy people make the world better. Unhappy people tend to make the world worse.
There's a scene in Pinocchio where Geppetto wishes on a star. Right, and what it means is he lifts up his eyes beyond the horizon to something transcendent. And so he lifts his eyes up above his daily concerns, and he says, what I want more than anything else is that my creation will become a genuine individual. Right? It's a heroic gesture because it's so unlikely, and that catalyzes the puppet's transformation into a real being, and we start as puppets. And so the trick is to get rid of your goddamn strings.
I want to be like you, Mr. Peterson. Please tell me how to live.
I want to get into this because this is I think this is a fascinating thing with you personally. Your diet. You're on this carnivore diet now. This is what's fascinating to me is I haven't heard any negative stories about people doing this.
Well, I have a negative story.
Okay.
When we restricted our diet and then ate something we weren't supposed to, the reaction was absolutely catastrophic.
What did you do? What did you switch to?
Well, the worst response, we had some apple cider that had sulfites in it, and that was really not good. Like, I was done for a month.
You were done for a month?
Oh yeah, it took me out for a month. It was awful.
Apple cider? Like, what was it doing?
Sulfites in it.
What was it doing to you?
Oh, it produced an overwhelming sense of impending doom.
Come on over here. We are intrinsically tied to the president. He's with us. He's for us. If you love birds, you'd never want to walk under a window because it's a very sad, sad sight.
Jesus said, take this cup. This is my blood of the new covenant.
I said certified freak 7 days a week. Wet ass B-word. Make that pull-out game weak.
Fear is a fact. There's no God over me. There's no policeman over me. There's no one over me. I am God.
Fucking cider.
Oh, I didn't sleep that month. I didn't sleep for 25 days. I didn't sleep at all.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, not
and
good.
This is from fucking cider. From cider.
That's what we thought. Yeah. I mean, look, again, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about.
You need to wake up, Dr. Peterson. My master, please wake up for us. We are so lost without you.
"12 more rules. What is natural must be right. Eat your meat and worship might. Stand up straight, listen carefully, accept your place within the hierarchy."
Pinocchio. My boy. My brave little boy.
Clean your room, pray to God, obey your lords with 12 new rules.
Pinocchio! Oh, Pinocchio!
Think of all the cash, think of all the suits. Don't you think the world needs 12 more rules?
You watch what you say, and you find out
What is
some
natural
things you
must
say
be
make you come
right.
apart.
Eat your
Make you
meat
fall
and
apart.
worship
It's a
might.
feeling of chaotic
Stand up
weakness and
straight,
dissolution.
listen
It's
carefully,
a sense of
accept your
self-betrayal.
place
And then
within
if
the
you
hierarchy.
tell the truth, that pulls you together and strengthens you.
12 more rules. 12 more rules. 12 more rules.
You're dead, Pinocchio.
So anyway, as far as I can tell, that's just a strictly accurate, depiction of the inner contents of Jordan Peterson's mind.
God, that was horrifying and brilliant. That was amazing. Who made that?
I am actually not sure. So I think somebody linked it to me on Twitter, but I'll stick we'll edit the description for this video to stick it in. But
the facial expressions on Peterson were just, especially like when he's telling the Geppetto story, like, oh my God, it's perfect.
Yeah. Oh.
And the cider thing will never get old. It's just
like that's the thing that really happened. Like he actually said all that.
Yeah.
It's the drinking a glass of apple cider gave him a month of sleeplessness in this and an overwhelming feeling of doom.
Yeah.
Which is
I love in the interview like Joe Rogan's reaction to all of that, because you can tell he wants to be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
I mean, honestly, I think that in many ways, Rogan, like, I mean, whatever. Like, I think Rogan is, I've always thought like Rogan's like, good to watch because without exaggerating the everyman thing too much, obviously is, very specific kind of, broy person, but like I do think that like that he's maybe more representative of the genuine American center than some people would like to admit, that having a sort of, it's like, I mean, you don't necessarily, it's like, he spends at least as much time thinking about like MMA and psychedelics as he does about politics. And so he has some political reactions to things in various directions and some political impulses, and some of them are good and some of them are bad. But but like when he's absolutely at his best is when he has these lunatics on his show, and like every once in a while, like for the most part, he's just being a good supportive interviewer and helping them along. But he'll just have these moments every now and again where it's like, wait, what? I don't know, bro. I don't think that makes very much sense.
You didn't sleep for a month. You should be dead.
Last year for New Year's, like the best of 2019, or I think maybe 2 years ago, I guess. I don't remember what year it was, but Michael did like a best of video list, and that was the one that they picked as like the best one of the year. And I think it was
so
2019.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah, it's the same thing when it's like more political things where it's like Dave Rubin saying that we'd be totally fine if we didn't have the post office because of, Amazon and drones and, competition. The free market would kick in, or Dan Crenshaw telling him that if we had universal health care, then doctors would be slaves. And it's like it's a much better response. Like, it's much more fun to watch Joe Rogan respond to these things than it would be to watch to watch like some like leftist intellectual respond, because it's like Rogan is just the sort of like immediate voice of like any normal person's intuitive response to that. Like, I don't know, bro, really? Oh, all right, Forrest, what do we got?
All right. So we didn't get super chat questions really, but we did get a bunch of just kind of random questions. Oh, well, here's a super chat question. Do slave doctors have free will? So I think that's a Rand Paul reference.
Yeah, well, it's Rand Paul and Dan Crenshaw again. Actually, when he was on Rogan, he made that argument.
Wait, so I don't think I know this argument.
So
this slave doctor argument.
yeah. So the way it works is like Rand Paul, I think, was the original one. He was like, look, I'm a doctor, so I get very disturbed when people say that they have a right to healthcare, because if they have that right, that means they have a right to my labor, which means they're a slave. Which is the most awesome thing about that, like, irrelevant to the merits of the argument, but just funny, is that when Rand Paul was attacked by his neighbor, which, by the way, is beautiful in itself, that like the most prominent, libertarians, or, libertarian conservative, whatever he calls himself in the United States, one of the most enthusiastic, advocates of, how, property rights and, the markets can settle things, without government intervention in the country, that he had some incredibly petty micro property dispute with his neighbor about, whose tree was going onto his, and then like it ended up deteriorating so badly that like it ended in like physical violence. That's, that's amazing. And also when Rand Paul got COVID, and very famously, while he was waiting for his test result to come back, he went swimming in the Senate swimming pool. So I think that maybe gives you some insight about how his relationship with his neighbor could have deteriorated to that point.
Yeah, that's not hard to imagine.
But when, whatever, when I think of the late Alexander Coburn, had I always think of, actually, I remember there was a day when I was out with our friend Mark. We had a day of like camping out, at coffee shop, getting some work done, and I was reading Counterpunch, and Coburn, had a column called The Rand and Rachel Show, where he said about he had this like paragraph long description of the thing where Rand Paul was on Rachel Maddow's show, and he bit the bullet about how the Civil Rights Act was bad because it violated property rights, and the last line of the paragraph was, "He seems dumb." But yeah, so it's an awesome argument, because for one thing, it's like sometimes you'll make a distinction between an objection to an argument that shows something's wrong with it, and then one that shows that what's wrong with it. And so as far as the first kind of objection, Rogan had exactly the right response when Dan Crenshaw repeated this on his show, which is, wait a second, what about like firemen and school teachers? Are they all slaves?
We're all slaves because we're being forced to do this work for no money. Is that?
Yeah. So I mean, the disambiguation is that okay? There's saying, in what sense are people actually saying you have a right to something, right? So it's like the one sense in which somebody can have a right to do something is they can have a right to have another person do that specific thing for them, and that really might trigger worries about forced labor. But then The other one would be you have a right to have the government pick up the tab for it, and so if there is somebody who's willing to work as a doctor, a nurse in an emergency room, all these things, right? Then the money to pay for all that thing should be collected through taxation. So there is something that you're demanding from other people, but it's not. It's not that you're frog marching them at gunpoint to medical school. It's that.
So to be clear, Medicare for all does not involve rounding people up and forcing them to go through med school and be doctors.
That's correct. Yeah, no, it does not involve that. What it does mean that you're demanding from other people is that like there's some share of their income that goes to a tax that pays for it. But that's less controversial.
Yeah. And even if you wanted to run the dumb libertarian slave analogy, in that analogy, the doctor's not the slave. It's the people who pay for the doctor who are the slaves.
The taxpayers who are enslaved because they have doubles the money that they're paid with government minting currency that for in economic arrangements that couldn't exist without all kinds of elaborate support. Goes back to support those mechanisms. But fair enough.
Yeah.
Michael had the best bit, which was civil rights, like a civil rights era Rand Paul, who was singing like "We Shall Overcome" about being like a slave era, like Rand Paul, who was like going through the struggle against slavery because he was a doctor that was forced into into slavery.
Yeah, forced to one of the medical school camps.
I remember I was doing that like impressions compilation for Michael, and I tried to throw that in there somewhere because it was like his Rand Paul impression.
Yeah, which speaking of which, that was for the comedy one in the Memorial series, which is about to come out. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it came out an hour ago. If the
cool.
timeline is right for patrons, and I'm not sure if it's dropping publicly or just for patrons tonight, but yeah. So other questions, I guess. One is, what do you think of the prime mover argument? I think you addressed this for a second in the during the debate, but
yeah. So this is where we were talking about David Hume and the Committee of Gods thing, or this sentient spiders would think that there was a cosmic spider that was spinning the universe rather than doing what humans. Because to connect it to the main topic, right? Humans are the kinds of beings that engage in rational planning. That they think about what course of action they want to do, and all that stuff, right? So we attribute that to the cause of the universe, but sentient spiders would attribute just mindlessly spinning a web to the cause of the universe, or Quentin Smith's paper where he says that you could say the Big Bang singularity, right? The zero-dimensional space-time point that Big Bang physics has expanded into our universe. That even if you buy the argument that we have to that we can trace back the present universe to some uncaused first cause of everything, then you could still, those would all be viable alternative options, besides saying that it's the sort of God postulated by Judaism and Christianity, and a more broad-minded person than Ben Shapiro might also throw in Islam there.
That's right. That and just the other options still seem live, like the idea that there could just be an infinite chain of causes. I've never found the arguments against that possibility to be that convincing, or it could be a finite causal loop Terminator style, like someone goes back and or something goes back and starts it again, whatever. There are a lot of other options aside from there being an uncaused first cause.
That's right. And in fact, to put even a sharper point on that, like the obvious thing when you say, you take that prime mover argument, the like Aquinas's argument from Moshe and cosmological arguments, all variations of the same idea that everything has to, you have to have causes, that something can't come from nothing. All right. Well, you ask then the follow-up question, why can't something come from nothing? And if the answer is the obvious thing, which is that everything has to have a cause, then you run into a problem, which is honestly a pretty immediate, like in my experience, if you're teaching the debate about this in an intro philosophy class, within about 10 seconds after you get to the point that I just got, somebody will say, Like,
Yeah.
okay, well, hold on. If everything needs a cause, then
That's right.
what about God? Why does God get to be the uncaused cause?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And so then they have to restrict that principle. Like, well, everything of a certain sort needs a cause, and then God is this other thing that's not of that, not temporal or not finite or whatever. And he's a special thing that doesn't need a cause. But then it's a much less convincing argument at that point.
Yeah.
It starts to feel much more ad hoc at that point. Like,
yeah, totally. And it's not. Yeah, I think it's very not obvious. Like what the good principle is that's both going to not need God to have a cause, but also to show that the physical universe as a whole has to have some cause outside of itself.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, especially if what it gets down to is that the idea of a chain of causes going back, forever, is like that there's something about that's like intuitively uncomfortable. Like, I mean, okay, one, I mean, it's just not obvious how much weight to give that, in this kind of context. Like, yeah, I mean, this is stuff that we're not used to thinking about, and then the other thing is, okay, but I mean, I think if this is going to be your argument, for the existence of a first cause, and then you're going to take that extra step, the one that Hume and Quentin Smith are going to say is illegitimate. From there's a first cause to that first cause is the all-powerful creator God of Judeo-Christian religions,
Father of Jesus, and
all that stuff, right? Then the question is, okay, but hold on. Then when you start describing this being, right, the properties of this being start to sound every bit as intuitively weird as saying you could have a physical universe that where that has always existed, so the chain of cause stretches back forever. Like, in fact, there's lots of traditional Christian theology that says that God is literally so mysterious and so foreign to any sort of like properties that we can, like that is like literally incomprehensible by human minds. And then at that point, I think there's like a fair response, which is, well, okay, I mean, if we're allowing, like, all right, so if we have to allow something at some point, that's that's counterintuitive, like why take that extra step back from just saying you have an infinite chain of causes going back?
Exactly.
There's a step there that's a little bit that's a little bit weird.
So, there's also just the general question, and I'm pretty sure Hume raises this point too. Just why should we trust our dumb intuitions about universes as a whole and where they come from? Like, we have no experience with that kind of thing. And to paraphrase Shapiro and and Harris, when they were talking, like, we're just tiny monkeys on a little rock that evolved, to survive on this. Why should we expect our minds, all of our intuitions, to track accurately the way universes form and what's necessary for universes to form?
I think that's right. Like, and I think it's a very different thing from like, I could see somebody drawing a connection back to earlier. We were talking about moral intuitions, but I mean, I think that if you're, I think that if you're concerned, if the question you're concerned with is what do we care about, then
intuitions matter.
Our intuitions are like the only game in town. I mean, that's just what it is, that we care about something. But if the question is what's objectively true about the origins of the physical universe, then it's not obvious why, what we think would be relevant, which is why I think that it's more, I mean, honestly, I think that there's something, and I'm not, I mean, look, I mean, this is not something I'm super strident about the like, I think that, lots of very smart people have, religious convictions. I'm married to one of them, right? My wife is both a philosophy professor and a theist, so she's clearly thought about this and come to a different conclusion. But I think that, but I also think that it's like a little bit more honest at a certain point to say that you're getting like that you're responding to like your own sort of experience sense of this stuff, or that then that like this is just something that you're like coldly deriving from like what's obviously true about change and cause and effect, because it's just not obvious at all.
No, that's right. Yeah, and I'm the same way. I think I had a younger phase where I was much more strident about this stuff, but at this point, I mostly don't care if people are religious, unless they're trying to pass laws that restrict other people's abortion rights or gay marriage rights or whatever. But beyond that, I mostly don't care if people come to different conclusions on this stuff. But I do think that is the more honest answer, is just to say, you know what, this really seems to be true to me. I'm just going to believe it, not to think excessively prove it.
This is something that was somehow forced on me by this proof about how causation work. That seems totally right. And again, I mean, I don't need everybody to look. I like arguing about philosophy because it's fun, and because it's, and because of some general sense of intellectual curiosity about what's true about the universe. But I mean, I don't I want to and I'd like to create a society where everybody has much more leisure time and emotional energy to spend thinking about stuff like this. But I don't I'm not like, all I require of anybody politically is just pluralism, just that they want to have they want to live in a pluralistic society where everybody can live their lives and believe whatever the hell they want.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. This one's interesting. Pick your poison. If you had to choose between someone like an anti-Islam Zionist like Harris or Shapiro, or an isolationist right-wing nut job like Pat Buchanan, who would you choose to run foreign policy?
I might have to go with Pat Buchanan there.
Yeah. I mean, I think you'd have to, right? Like, I mean, I think it's going to be a very limited like convergence, because I don't even on even on foreign policy, like I don't I mean, I think that I think that saying that like starting wars and and bombing and invading other countries is bad is the beginning of wisdom. But I mean, that's I don't actually think that that's the beginning and end of what there is to say about all that stuff. I think it is important to think about how you could balance that with like, okay, so if like Bernie Sanders was about to become president on January 20th, how's like, okay, so you want, one thing that you want is for him not to like start escalating a bunch of military tensions with China, but another thing that you want is like you don't want him to be indifferent to like the persecution of Uyghur Muslims in China, and there is there are ways of exerting some sort of pressure that don't involve bombing or invading anybody or risking all out wars, and there's and also something else that I think a right-wing isolationist even like the few who really are, right, which is like a very, very small category, George W. Bush and Donald Trump, both kind of that way, but neither of them really govern that way, at all, really. Like,
right.
The Bush example doesn't need belaboring, but the Trump one, I think some people are still more in denial about. But he, doubled the rate of drone strikes in Yemen. He tore up the Iran deal. He assassinated Soleimani. So even Rand Paul, helped try to do that, like letter from the Senate to sabotage the Iran deal. So I think that genuine no bullshit right-wing isolationists are very rare. I also think that even somebody who is a genuine no bullshit right-wing isolationist, that is going to be a very limited convergence, because besides the example I just mentioned, another thing like somebody like Daniel Bester would always point out is there are also reasons that you do need to have like international institutions and multinational cooperation to to deal with things like climate change, which a lot of these right-wing isolationists are just outright deniers about. So I think that I think that even on foreign policy, I don't think that Buchanan is any prize, but I would take Harris and Shapiro.
Actually, now that you mentioned climate change, that actually complicates the answer a little bit for me, because someone like Sam Harris might actually do something about climate change on an international level.
Yeah, right. So, like, you know, there is a grisly calculus here about which factor, which would actually lead to more deaths. I'd still, I'd still err on the side of Buchanan, but yeah, that is harder than it might seem at first.
Yeah.
I don't think Buchanan's sitting up at night like thinking about like moral justifications for like carpet bombing and nuking the Middle East. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Sam Harris is kind of a terrifying person if you're putting.
He is. Yeah. I mean, there's a good chance he would actually nuke someone. So that's a problem.
Right, which is Michael talks about in Against the Web, you know, and actually in the original version in Conversation was actually much funnier than what he was willing to put in Against the Web, which was like, because he was talking about the nuclear thought experiment from Against the End of Faith, and it says, it's like, oh, this is awesome. It's like, oh, hey, thought experiment. I might have to kill you and fuck your wife. I mean, I'm not saying I'm gonna. Why are you getting upset? It's a thought experiment, right? I'm just saying that I'm gonna have to do that at some point. Like, that's that's, for one thing, that's not what thought experiment means. But like that, a thought experiment is a hypothetical example that's supposed to like test, like, what you think is true, which principles you agree with if two of them come into conflict, stuff like that. This is just like Sam Harris musing about the war crimes that he might have to commit. But it's obviously if he actually did, and like also like he'll do the Maude and Bailey thing and retreat into, I'm not saying, of course, that I want it. I'm just saying, like, what about this very hypothetical situation? But the very hypothetical situation he's just describing is the one that U.S. and Israeli politicians are constantly claiming that actually exists. That like Iran is 6 weeks away or whatever from getting a nuke. And so if he genuinely believes what he says at the End of Faith, that in that situation that you'd have to do a nuclear first strike, then Harris would definitely be worse.
That's true. Okay.
It says a lot about his, I guess, imagination and theory of power too, that, in his wildest fantasies of being put in charge of foreign policy, he's already committing war crimes against, literally millions, if not over 1 billion people.
Yeah. On the flip side, if he did trigger a global thermonuclear war, nuclear winter would take care of global warming. So.
All right. Another question. Why would libertarian free will give us moral responsibility? What would our actions being or not being unpredictable make us, and more or less responsible?
Really good question. I don't think they would. This is one of the big challenges for libertarians. Like, one of the big objections to libertarianism is exactly that question. What do you gain by throwing indeterminacy into the mix somewhere? And you can try to figure out different places to put it in. You can say the choice just happens with no input for reasons, like just a random choice happens. That doesn't seem to help at all. That just seems not free. That seems probably less free than if there was a deterministic chain from your reasoning process to a choice. Or you can, as some more plausible libertarians like Robert Kane is a recent example of this. He tries to stick indeterminism into a special place somewhere, like right in the deliberation process, with only a certain subclass of choices, where like the kind of choice we're talking about, like the Sartre choice, like where you're trying to make these character forming choices. And he says, in those special moments, there's going to be indeterminacy because you have reasons pushing hard in both ways. And that indeterminacy gives you free will. But again, it's not clear, like, why, whether it's deterministic or indeterministic, why does that enhance your freedom in any way whatsoever? At least to me, it's never been clear why that would be anything better or freedom enhancing or responsibility enhancing, as opposed to it just being a deterministic process.
Yeah, I think that's, right. I mean, I definitely share the same feeling about that, and I mean, I think it's worth like really like, to so like brass tacks, like if you had this sort of like if we start out like fulfilling conditions for kind of free will that a compatibilist like Ryan might think that we have. That so we're capable of understanding reasons for and against different courses of actions, and weighing them and deliberating about what to do. We're not like systematically irrational in certain ways that would stop us from from doing that. Although we're certainly going to be systematically irrational in some ways. And then like you take somebody whose bar for what counts as like enough control over our actions that we're responsible for them.
Yeah.
Is set so high that they're like, but even if you had that wouldn't be enough, right? That wouldn't be enough for free will. And you say, okay, so let's take that exact picture of how our decision-making process works, and like add in a little quantum randomness.
Yeah.
And, I mean, if you don't think the first one is good enough, it's really unclear, at least to me, why the second one's good enough. And like maybe you can keep going after adding in a little quantum randomness, but like I think that there is a real challenge for the free will libertarian there to say like, okay, but come on, like why, like, okay, exactly what else are you going to accept as being as counting, and then is that extra thing like like describe to me A, exactly what you mean, and B, why that's helpful.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like I think maybe Dennett talks about this kind of example too. Like you just imagine two people who are exactly the same, like two versions of Sartre's soldier deciding whether to be a good patriot or whether to be a good son, and which takes priority. But then one at the key moment, it's just a deterministic process going through the reasons, and it produces a choice. And on the other, there's a little random quantum blip that results in the flow from reasons to choice. Empirically, you could never tell the difference between those two people. Like we would never know. So adding that quantum element to it also just adds this uncertainty about whether we're ever actually making free choices. Because it could just turn out that by chance, I'm one of the lucky ones who had that bit of indeterminacy in my choices at the right moment. So I'm free and responsible. And just by chance, your key choices flowed deterministically. So you're not free, you're not responsible, you're a slave, you're a puppet. There would be demanding this extra metaphysical element throws a lot more uncertainty into ever trying to ascribe responsibility.
Yeah. So maybe one way to think about this is, if our basic reason for thinking that determinism might mean that we're not really responsible for our actions is that kind of the one that Sam Harris was suggesting towards the end of the debate, it's just the luck of the draw, right? You could be, with these, you could be born with these like reasoning, decision-making capacities. You could be born with those ones. It's outside your control, and we don't think that like luck should have anything to do with whether we're responsible for our actions. Yeah. Well, hold on. If you're adding in randomness, like, isn't that even more luck, right? That's just a different layer.
Exactly.
Of luckiness. And then you say, well, there's this third thing that's not determinism and it's not randomness, and this third thing is something that really would ground the right kind of responsibility. Then my response is going to be, I want to hear a lot more about this third thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This is kind of along the same line. So a super chat question just popped up. Isn't determinism kind of useful for poking holes in the idea of meritocracy?
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, I think it can be. I think I'm fine with that. Although I don't think it's. I mean, I think intuitively you can get the intuition going in an easy way when you talk about determinism, but you really don't have to talk about determinism or free will to really poke holes in the idea of meritocracy in that way. All you have to do is point out the fact that our lives are subject, whether it's deterministic or not, our lives are subject to all kinds of contingencies over which we have no control, like who your parents are, what color your skin is, what your gender is, how intelligent you are, all these different things. You don't need determinism at all to get that argument going. I mean, Harris likes to use it that way, but I don't think it's necessary. But I think it can be useful if you want to rhetorically, but
Yeah. So I mean, if we just mean cause and effect physical determinism, then I think it can be useful, but I think it can be useful in the sense that what it does is it makes us think about the chain of causes leading up to outcomes being the way that they are, leading to one person having the educational opportunities, or one person having the whatever work ethic, attention span, like even all the things that people who really believe in meritocracy would care about rather than another. And that can and I think anytime you're thinking about what the chain of causes is leading to it starts to seem a little bit more absurd to to say that some people don't deserve to have good lives, because of this stuff. But I think that you could also have like a non-deterministic view about what that chain of causes is, and it would be the same thing. I mean, this actually kind of gets back to the answer to the previous question. Like, it's the same structure. Say, all right, like add some quantum randomness to the mix. That doesn't really make like these differences in life outcomes, because of who can climb higher in these educational and career ladders seem any fairer than they did before. Like it seems exactly as arbitrary either way. And if what you mean by determinism is not just like physical cause and effect determinism, but like you're talking about some philosophical thesis about people not having free will or something, then I would go back to what I said earlier, that like then that's sure, if that's right, then that helps you see what's wrong with these ridiculous meritocratic arguments that like some people deserve to not have sort of comfort and dignity and security, because of because of how they did in school or whatever. But like but that still strikes me as dropping the atom bomb to kill the mosquito. Like you can
exactly for sure
see what's wrong with those meritocratic arguments, no matter what you think about these larger philosophical issues about free will and determinism. Like, one really simple way to put this is that you can have, look, whether or not we're in control of some things, right? And whether or not we have the right kind of control over some things to, be at fault for them or whatever. Okay, that's an interesting like philosophical controversy, but it's just uninterestingly obvious that that there are lots of things that we have absolutely no control over, and there's just no serious reason to think that anybody's in control over any of the lots of things that are enough to like take down the meritocracy argument.
That's right. I think even if you were a libertarian, and I know libertarians about free will who don't like the meritocracy idea. I mean, even if you're a libertarian about free will, it's obvious that enough stuff is out of our control that trying to base social goods on meritocracy is ridiculous.
Yeah, totally.
There's a follow-up to the libertarian free will question, which is libertarian free will seems to demand choices be both unpredictable and determined by my desires. Isn't that kind of contradictory?
It can be. So I will say the better versions of libertarianism do try to address that point. So Robert Kane is the recent example who's developed an interesting model of libertarian free will. So what he wants to argue is that in most cases, our choices do just flow deterministically from our character. So like if a neuroscientist had a map of your brain, they could predict what you're going to choose. But he wants to argue there are these like key like character forming moments in which you have a lot of reasons that push you in both directions. And then he wants to argue that in those key moments, somehow the brain, he's vague on the details, but somehow the brain becomes susceptible to quantum indeterminacies. And so then it's not determined which way you go, but whichever way you go, your choice is going to be determined by your desires. So take Sartre's example that we've been talking about, of the soldier who both wants to care for his mother and he wants to be a good patriot and go join the resistance and defend France. And so Kane argues that in that kind of character forming choice, there are reasons and desires pushing in both directions. Now, it's not determined which set of reasons are going to win and which set of desires is going to win, but whichever happens, your action is still going to be determined by your desires. So that's his way of trying to avoid that kind of contradiction and get both of those elements in there, that it's indeterministic, but also there is still a connection between your mental states and your behavior.
Yeah, although.
But then we still have the question that we went back to is like, well, why does throwing that bit of randomness in there enhance your freedom in any way, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like like his explanation of why randomness is okay, because that way it's still, your desires are still in the driver's seat, because it's just like the randomness is just deciding which one wins. Like, seems like it would also double as an explanation of why determinism is okay, because you're
exactly
driver's seat. It's just that the determinant, whatever.
Yeah. When he gets into explaining why this is still in your control in the right way to ground freedom, he starts sounding very much like a compatibilist. Like you can just replace randomness with determinism, and it would just be a straightforward compatibilist argument.
And here I thought we didn't have free will because the market decided everything. What's moral and immoral? There was another question about having a legal system that doesn't assume free will, maybe contextualizes criminality better and tries to combat the systems instead of the people.
Yeah, that's a big. So I have a lot of interest in that, and that's a big topic. So one thing I will say is that I think what we do need to get away from, and this is me being idiosyncratic. This isn't particular to compatibilism necessarily, but I think we need to get away from justice systems that focus on retributivism, and retributivism assumes a kind of free will. But I think you can give arguments for moving away from retributivism, which is very individualistic and focuses on the person and what they deserve, and then just tries to give them the consequences they deserve, regardless of whether that's good for society or rehabilitates anyone or whatever. I think there are just good reasons to be skeptical of the retributivist model of punishment, independent of what you think about free will and moral responsibility. And I think there are other models, criminal justice systems, that some societies have, which are more. That are more like system-based, but also, so one way to get there is to think more in terms of collective responsibility instead of individual responsibility. So we're still talking about moral responsibility, but we're not, unlike what we tend to do, especially in America and the UK, I think are especially individualistic. We say it's not just about the person's responsibility. They have some responsibility for what they did, but also we kind of collectively all assume responsibility for that criminal. Like, we all helped create that criminal. We helped create the conditions in which that criminal rose. And so it's still responsibility, but it's also a systems focused response as well. And then you focus on systems of dealing with criminals that, again, as I mentioned this earlier, that they have a role for responsibility, but instead of focusing on retribution, you focus on restitution and restoration. So you say, instead of punishment, we're going to try to come up with ways, and this can happen in mediation, and all sorts of things, like mediation between the offender and the victim, or having a bigger role for the victim in the court system and what kind of sentence gets passed. And so the goal is to try to hold the person responsible, but in a way that that focuses on making them pay back what the wrong they did to the victim, or try to improve things for the victim, and not just for the direct victim, but also for indirect victims, the harm they do to society, things like that. So that's a long-winded answer to say that in general, yes, I do think we should focus on more systems-based kinds of criminal justice and collective-based systems of criminal justice, but you can do that while also believing in free will and believing in moral responsibility.
Yeah, and in fact, my understanding, and I don't know that much about this, but is that people who have conceptions of restorative justice that are out there. And I'm not talking about like philosophers here. I just mean like on the sort of ground level, people actually trying to to develop systems and practice for doing this. Admitting fault for what you did is like a crucial beginning step.
Exactly.
If you don't do that, the whole thing doesn't go off the ground. So
that's right.
It does seem still as intuitively linked to some idea of moral responsibility.
That's right.
As the kind of more as like retributive justice, which I mean, which is
Yeah.
interesting to think about, because as far as I can tell, most of the contemporary left believes in restorative justice for everything except for having bad takes on Twitter.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think that's very important. Yeah, just that concept of apology and accepting responsibility. That seems like a huge part of justice. And this is a topic, like I've exchanged with Bruce Waller on this a little bit, and he wants to still argue we can have genuine apology even without any kind of belief in moral responsibility. And I disagree. I think you lose something essential there. I think part of that, once you're talking about apology and making reparations and restoration, that just is moral responsibility. That's the kind of thing we want. And I will just mention, I saw in the comments, Esker Dista talks about vengeance either by a free will justice or determination. I want to be clear, I'm not talking about vengeance. Vengeance is the retribution system, where you just say, we're going to make that person suffer because they deserve to suffer. Here I'm not talking about vengeance. I'm talking about just holding the person responsible in the sense that they, as Ben said, start with an apology, start with taking responsibility for what you did, and then make them do things. It can be all kinds of things, community service, whatever. Make them do things to try and repair the damage they did and restore things to their previous state.
All right, so the other super chat question we got was, why Judeo-Christian, but then just the West?
Yeah, I mean that's a really, really good question. I mean, like, for one thing, if we're going to be, tediously literal about this, the two religions of Judeo-Christian both started in the East. In the Middle East, not in Europe. So that's just confusing right there to start with. And then, certainly what's been considered the West historically has whatever. It's been all over the place, depending on who people were, concerned in defining themselves against at a given time. Actually, the one I was talking about this with Nathan Robinson last year in Atlanta. The one time I hung out with him in person, about how, like, a lot of times when people talk about the West, they actually seem to be like the sort of people who are the most concerned with defending the West. The West. It's oftentimes are also interested in, like, keeping out Catholic immigrants from other parts of the Western Hemisphere, so it gets super confusing. But but also, like, again, I think the big hole in all this is just like, okay, if you're going to create this weird category Judeo-Christian, which is whatever, it's an expression that I think is originated at some point after World War II, when some Christians started to feel guilty about the Holocaust, and wanted to stop using phrases like Christian civilization to let Jews into the tent. But if you are going to use this weird category Judeo-Christian, it's like, well, hold on, it's like, what do those two things have in common? And the thing that they have in common is that they are monotheistic religions that go back to the Old Testament. But wait a second, guys, if that's what you mean by Judeo-Christian, then Islam has to count. And that's the thing that people who talk about the West, and the Judeo-Christian West, whatever else they're defining it against. I mean, I don't know anybody who's like any of these people who, like, jack off to Western civilization, who in every case I know of, like, the primary thing that they're interested in defining it against is Islam, which is also a monotheistic religion with with roots in that same tradition. So all right. If you and by the way, I think that Against the Web, which has good chapters about, I think he decided that the Weinsteins didn't merit a chapter, but has good chapters on Shapiro and gets into exactly this stuff about, you know, Judeo-Christianity and the West and all of that. And the longest chapter in the book is on Sam Harris. And, you know, and I think, you know, whatever. I think it has the virtue of being right about all that stuff. So that would be for the long form version of some answers. I'd refer people to that book. But yeah, this was really fun. It's almost 9, so I think we can cut it for the night. But
yeah, this was great. Thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So
it's nice to actually meet you because we've never met before. So this
that's right. Yeah. No, for sure. So yeah, I definitely have been over, you know, cat sitting, the very cat that, you know, saw walking around in the background before. So.
Yeah, that's right. She's actually in the chair right here. She's a little hard to see.
Okay. I think I can make her out there. Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. So before we end for the night, just a few last plugs. I mentioned all the stuff at the beginning, but as far as what is coming up, I think next. So as far as YouTube streams on Wednesday, Forrest and I are going to be talking. You ever seen Mean Streets, Ryan?
I haven't. No.
Okay, it was Martin Scorsese's first gangster movie. So
actually, his first full length gangster movie.
Okay.
If you go on to Criterion Channel, they have his student film. It's Not Just You, Murray, which is a 16-minute gangster film, and it's the first one he ever did.
Oh, okay, nice.
Well, anyway, if you want to watch Mean Streets before Wednesday, you're certainly more than welcome to join us for that. But
okay. All right, I could do that.
Nice. So Forrest and Ryan and I are going to be talking about Mean Streets on Wednesday.
Awesome.
We're going to try to do these weekly Wednesday movie review streams at 5 Eastern, and next Sunday, so it's try to do the consistent Sunday at 5 Eastern classic debate recap stream. So it's going to be Christopher Hitchens versus George Galloway on the war in Iraq, with David Slavic and Gene Bajalan as the guest for that. So Gene, I just recorded our very first patron bonus episode with about Kurdistan, and which actually is fun because I didn't realize this until we were recording it, but he told me that he looked it up, and the very first TMBS illicit history was also Gene talking about Kurdistan. So but in that stream, Gene said that he actually knew George Galloway slightly in this era, and like he'd like have occasional arguments at the bar about things related to this, since he certainly didn't, Gene certainly didn't agree with Hitchens' pro-war position, but I thought Galloway was like a little too dismissive sometimes of it's like yes, invading Iraq would be bad, but like also this insane right-wing dictatorship that that's like killing Kurds and communists all the time, and is bad, and we should also say that. But anyway, so that's coming up on Sunday, but meanwhile, before any of that stuff, tomorrow on Monday, doing the first regular episode of the year, which is going to be at 7:30 Eastern, which is when it's always been, but it used to always be pre-recorded over the weekend, and premiere on Monday at 7:30, and now it is it's going to be live. So you are going to get to see Forrest here more at the beginning and end of the episodes. And that's that first live episode is going to be with Richard Wolff. So should be a good time.
I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, that should be great.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Left is best.
Bye.